Hello, friends. Welcome to the Sleep Aliens. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I'm contract security for oil and gas facilities in the northwest part of the state. I drive around in the dark across this irregular pattern of well sites, pump modules, and unstaffed facilities from Farmington to the Colorado line. Night after night, I'm solo in these roads don't appear on the GPS screens in my truck. I'm looking at gates and running diagnostics on machinery that's many miles from the nearest house. Out there, the terrain is high desert. There's scattered juniper trees, mesas of red rock that slice the skyline like the tops of teeth, and areas of nothingness so vast it makes you the last person alive. I've been doing this job 6 years. I know the roads to avoid during heavy rains, the ranchers to wave to and the ones to avoid, and where the signal goes to dead silence. I thought I knew the area. That ended in late September near the New Mexico border, just outside of Dulce. I'd been assigned to run a swing shift covering the East Corridor, a route that pulls you through the Jicarilla Apache Nation and up toward a set of aging compressor stations that feed pipelines heading north. The company I work for handles the overflow when the local contractors are stretched thin. I took the job because the pay is decent and because I don't mind being alone. I pulled out of Bloomfield around 7 p.m. in my white F-150, company logos on the doors, a toolbox bolted in the bed, and a clipboard on the passenger seat with 18 stops marked in order. The sun dropped fast. By the time I cleared Dulce and headed east on a county road that shifts to gravel past the last gas station, the sky had gone from orange to deep purple. The radio lost its signal and switched to static. I turned it off. The only sound was the hum of the tires and the occasional ping of a rock kicked up against the undercarriage. The first 7 stops were routine. I logged pressures, checked fence lines, reset a tripped breaker at a small metering station. The land rolled gently with low hills covered in sage and scattered pine. At stop 8, a remote wellhead positioned on a shelf below a long mesa, I noticed the air had changed. It wasn't colder, it was still. No wind, no insect noise, no distant hum of a highway or a generator. Just silence that felt like it had weight. I stepped out of the truck and left the engine running. The headlights cut across a stretch of caliche and lit up a rusted gate with a faded "No Trespassing" sign wired to the post. I grabbed my flashlight and walked the perimeter. Everything checked normal. I logged the time and turned back toward the truck. That's when I saw the light. It sat motionless above the mesa to the south, maybe 2 miles out. Hard to judge distance in the dark. It was white, steady, and perfectly round. Not a star. Stars don't sit that low or hold that still. Not a plane. Planes blink. Not a tower light. There were no towers out there. I've worked these routes long enough to map every repeater, every microwave dish, every structure with a purpose. This didn't fit. I raised my flashlight and flicked it on and off twice, an old habit from search and rescue work I did years ago. The light didn't respond. It didn't move. I climbed into the truck and pulled my binoculars from the door pocket. Through the glass, the light held shape. A sphere, bright at the center, softer at the edges. No visible structure around it. No beam shooting down. It just floated there like someone had hung a lamp in the sky and walked away. I checked my watch, 9:47 p.m. I made a note on my clipboard and kept moving. The next stop was a booster station 12 miles east. The road narrowed and the grade climbed. I kept glancing at my mirrors, watching for the light behind me. It stayed in the same position relative to the mesa. When I crested a rise and looked again, it was gone. Not faded, just absent. I told myself it was a reflection, or a weather balloon or something from the Air Force operating out of Kirtland. I didn't believe any of those explanations, but I said them anyway to fill the silence inside the cab. At the booster station, I ran through my checklist. Gauges normal, no alarms. The site sat on a flat pad carved into the side of a low ridge with a view that stretched for miles in every direction. I stepped outside to get a signal check on my radio. The handset crackled with static and nothing else. I keyed the mic twice, no response from dispatch. Not unusual out there. I turned and scanned the horizon. 3 lights now, each one identical to the first. White, round, motionless. They formed a triangle, wide and even, hovering above different points along the mesa range. I felt my pulse tick up. I'm not the kind of person who panics easy. I've handled equipment failures in blizzards, and dealt with aggressive dogs at ranch gates, and pulled a truck out of a flash flood on my own. But standing there with those 3 lights burning steady in the blackness made my hands feel cold. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app. No service, but the camera worked. I aimed it at the lights and zoomed in as far as the lens would go. On the screen, I saw darkness and a faint glow that could have been anything. I took 3 photos anyway. When I checked them later, they showed nothing but black sky and noise. I got back in the truck and locked the doors. I know that sounds ridiculous. Locking doors against lights in the sky. But it felt necessary. I started the engine and followed the road northeast toward the next checkpoint. The lights stayed behind me. I didn't look back. Stop 11 was a valve cluster near a dry creek bed. I pulled up, left the truck running, and hustled through the inspection. My flashlight beam shook a little when I swept it across the valve stems. I blamed it on the cold, but my jacket was zipped, and I wasn't cold. I was scared. I finished in 4 minutes, half my normal time, and climbed back into the truck. The dashboard clock read 10:52 p.m. I had 7 stops left. I did the math. If I pushed it, I could finish by 1 a.m. and be back in Bloomfield before 2:30. I wanted off that route more than I've wanted anything in a long time. The road hooked south and ran parallel to a ridgeline. The truck's headlights caught the eyes of a mule deer standing in the brush. It didn't bolt, it just stared, head low, ears pinned back. I've seen spooked deer before. This was different. This was frozen. I eased past it and watched it in the mirror until the darkness swallowed it. A quarter mile later, my headlights dimmed. Not out, just weaker, like someone had turned a dial. The dash lights flickered. The fuel gauge dropped to empty and bounced back to half. The odometer reset to 0. The radio, still off, crackled to life with a burst of static so loud I flinched. Then everything went normal again. Lights bright, gauges steady, radio silent. I pulled over and put the truck in park. My hands were shaking. I gripped the wheel and made myself breathe slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth. I counted to 10. I told myself it was a loose battery cable or a failing alternator. Electrical gremlins happen. I've seen worse. I grabbed a wrench from the toolbox and popped the hood. The engine ticked as it cooled. I checked the battery terminals. Tight. I checked the alternator belt. Fine. I wiggled a few connectors and found nothing loose. I slammed the hood and got back inside. The clock now read 11:15 p.m. I'd lost time somewhere, but I couldn't place where. I keyed the radio again. This time I got a response. Faint, broken, but a voice. Unit 7, static, position. I pressed the mic. Unit 7, mile marker. I don't have a marker. East of Dulce on County Road 357, equipment check complete. Experiencing minor electrical irregularities. Continuing route. Static answered me. Then a voice, clearer this time, but not the dispatcher I knew. Unit 7, advised, do not stop. Maintain route, acknowledge. The phrasing was wrong. The tone was flat. I've worked with dispatchers who sound bored, annoyed, or half asleep. This one sounded like they were reading from a script they didn't write. Acknowledged, I said, and hung the mic back on the dash. I put the truck in gear and rolled forward. The road dipped into a shallow draw and climbed again. At the top, I saw them. Not 3 lights anymore. 7. They formed a loose cluster above the mesa, evenly spaced, each one identical in size and brightness. And they were lower now. Not on the ground, but closer. Close enough that I could see they weren't reflections or distant towers. They were objects. Solid, defined, hovering without sound. I stopped the truck in the middle of the road and killed the headlights. The world went black except for those 7 points burning white against the sky. I watched them for what felt like an hour, but was probably closer to 5 minutes. They didn't drift, they didn't blink. They held formation like they were locked to an invisible grid. Then they moved. All at once, they slid east in perfect unison. No acceleration, no arc. One moment they were there. The next moment they were a mile farther and still in formation. My stomach dropped. I've seen drones. I've seen helicopters in formation. I've seen flares dropped during training exercises. This was none of that. This was controlled, silent, and impossibly fast. I turned the headlights back on and punched the gas. The truck fishtailed on the loose gravel and straightened out. I didn't care about the remaining stops. I didn't care about my contract or the checklist or anything except getting off that road. I made it 3 miles before the hum started. Low, steady, felt more than heard. It came up through the seat and into my ribs. My teeth vibrated. The rearview mirror buzzed against its mount. I looked up and saw one of the lights directly above me, pacing the truck. It stayed centered over the cab no matter how I swerved or accelerated. The speedometer climbed. 50, 60, 70 on a dirt road in the dark. The light held. I slammed the brakes and the truck skidded to a stop in a cloud of dust. The light stopped too. It hung there, maybe 100 feet up, silent and bright. I could feel heat on my face through the windshield. Not burning, but warm like standing near a campfire. I grabbed my phone. Still no service. I opened the camera and aimed it up through the glass. The screen went white. Not blown out by light, just white, blank, empty. I lowered the phone and the screen returned to normal. I tried again. Same result. I threw the phone on the seat and gripped the wheel. The hum deepened. My vision blurred at the edges. I felt pressure behind my eyes like the start of a migraine. I thought about getting out and running, but running where? There was nothing but open country in every direction. I thought about lying on the horn, as if noise would matter. Instead, I shifted into drive and eased forward slowly. The light drifted with me. I sped up, it matched. I stopped, it stopped. We were connected somehow, tethered by something I couldn't see or name. The next checkpoint was a small compressor shed at the junction of 2 dirt roads. I could see the reflective marker post in my headlights a 1/4 mile ahead. The light above me began to pull away, rising slowly and drifting back toward the mesa. The hum faded. The pressure in my head eased. By the time I reached the junction, the sky was empty again. I sat there with the engine idling and my hands still locked on the wheel. I could see my knuckles white in the dashboard glow. I forced myself to breathe. I checked the clock. 12:33 a.m. I'd been on the road for over 5 hours and I had 4 stops left. I couldn't do it. I just couldn't. I grabbed the clipboard and scrawled a note across the bottom of the page. Electrical failure. Returning to base. Will complete route daylight hours. I signed it, dated it, and stuffed it in my jacket pocket. I turned the truck around and headed west. The road back felt longer. Every shadow looked wrong. Every distant ridge seemed closer than it should be. I kept the speed at 40 and my eyes on the road. Twice, I saw movement in my peripheral vision. Shapes that could have been deer or brush or nothing. I didn't slow down to check. I made it back to Dulce just after 1:30 a.m. The gas station was closed, but the lot lights were on. I pulled in and parked under the brightest one I could find. I got out and walked a slow circle around the truck, checking the paint, the tires, the bed. Everything looked normal. No burns, no marks, no evidence of anything. I climbed back in and locked the doors. I tilted the seat back and closed my eyes. Sleep didn't come. Every time I started to drift, I'd see those lights in formation, sliding across the sky without sound. I sat up and turned on the dome light. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos I'd taken. Black screen, black screen, black screen. Not even stars, just empty frames. At 6 a.m., I drove to the company yard in Bloomfield and parked in my usual spot. The day shift supervisor was already there, drinking coffee from a thermos and checking a spreadsheet on a tablet. I walked over and handed him the clipboard. He scanned the notes and frowned. "Electrical failure?" he asked. "What kind?" I told him the gauges had spiked, the lights had dimmed, and the radio had cut in and out. All true. I didn't mention the rest. He asked if I wanted to file a maintenance request. I said yes. He made a note and told me to take the truck to the shop that afternoon. I said I would. I went home and tried to sleep. My apartment sits on the north side of town in a small complex with thin walls and a parking lot full of work trucks. I pulled the blinds, set my phone on silent, and lay on top of the blankets. I stared at the ceiling and replayed the night in my head. The lights, the hum, the way the phone screen went white when I aimed it up, the way time had slipped and I couldn't account for the minutes. I didn't sleep. I got up at noon, showered, and drove the truck to the shop. The mechanic on duty was a guy named Paul I'd worked with before. He ran a diagnostic scan and found nothing. Battery voltage normal, alternator output normal. No fault code stored. He checked the grounds, tested the radio, and ran the headlights through a full cycle. Everything worked. He asked if I'd hit a pothole or driven through standing water. I said no. He shrugged and handed me a printout. "Truck's fine," he said. "Maybe you got a weird voltage spike from a lightning strike nearby. Happens sometimes." I thanked him and left. I knew it wasn't lightning. That night, I called dispatch and asked to be reassigned. The supervisor asked why. I told him I needed a route closer to town for personal reasons. He didn't push. He switched me to a day shift loop covering sites between Bloomfield and Aztec. Shorter distances, more traffic, no long stretches of empty road. I took it and didn't look back. For 3 weeks, I ran that route without incident. I checked gates, logged pressures, and went home before dark. I told myself I was fine. I told myself the lights were a fluke, a military exercise I'd stumbled into, something explainable if I just had the right information. I almost believed it. Then I met Marcus. He worked security for a different contractor covering the same general area but on opposite shifts. We crossed paths at a truck stop in Aztec one morning. He was finishing his night run and I was starting my day. We got to talking over coffee. I asked him how long he'd been working the area. He said 8 years. I asked if he'd ever seen anything strange. He stopped stirring his coffee and looked at me for a long moment. "Strange how?" he asked. I kept it vague. Lights in the sky, equipment acting up, that kind of thing. He nodded slowly and said, "You were out east, weren't you? Past Dulce." I didn't answer right away. He took that as confirmation. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "I don't work that route anymore," he said. "I used to. 3 years ago, I had a night that made me request a transfer. I was up near the mesa, same area you're talking about, and I saw lights. Not one. Not three, a dozen. They moved like they were tied together. No sound. No heat signature when I checked with the thermal scope I keep for wildlife. My truck died twice. The radio gave me voices I didn't recognize. And when I got back to the yard, I had 2 hours missing I couldn't account for. My dash cam was erased. My phone was drained to zero even though it was fully charged when I left." He said it like he was reciting a shopping list. Flat, factual, no embellishment. I asked him if he'd reported it. He shook his head. "I wrote it up. Supervisor filed it and told me not to talk about it. A week later, 2 guys in suits showed up at the yard. Not company. Not local law. They asked to see my logs and my truck. They didn't identify themselves. They left, and I never heard anything else. I switched routes the next month." He finished his coffee and stood up. "If you saw something out there, don't chase it. Don't try to go back for a better look. Just work a different area and forget about it. That's what I did." He walked out before I could ask anything else. I sat there for a while, turning his words over in my mind. I wanted to dismiss it. I wanted to believe he was exaggerating or misremembering. But the details matched too closely. The lights, the dead electronics, the missing time. I pulled out my phone and opened a browser. I searched for UFO sightings, Dulce, New Mexico. The results filled the screen. Hundreds of reports going back decades. Lights over the mesa. Strange aircraft. Cattle mutilations. Stories from ranchers, truck drivers, hunters, and hitchhikers. Some of them sounded ridiculous. Others sounded exactly like what I'd seen. I closed the browser and deleted the search history. I didn't want a record. That weekend, I drove back out toward Dulce. I told myself I was just passing through on my way to see a friend in Pagosa Springs. That was a lie. I wanted to see the area in daylight. I wanted proof that it was just high desert and dirt roads and nothing more. I took Highway 64 west and turned south on 537. The land looked normal. Junipers, sage, red rock, and open sky. I passed the gas station and kept going. I found the county road I'd been on that night and followed it east. The well sites were easy to spot in the daylight. Chain-link fences, small metal sheds, gravel pads. I stopped at the valve cluster near the dry creek bed and got out. The air was warm and still. A hawk circled overhead. There was no hum, no pressure, no lights. Just a quiet afternoon in the middle of nowhere. I walked to the spot where my truck had stalled and looked around. The ground showed tire tracks from dozens of vehicles. Mine, others, all blending together in the dust. I scanned the mesa to the south. It looked like every other mesa in the region. Flat-topped, layered rock, sparse vegetation. Nothing special, nothing sinister. I got back in my truck and continued east. I reached the booster station where I'd seen the 3 lights in formation. I parked and climbed the short slope to the equipment pad. From there, I had a clear view in all directions. I took a slow 360, looking for towers, structures, anything that could explain what I'd seen. There was nothing, no power lines, no microwave dishes, no buildings, just miles of empty country under a blue sky. I stayed there for an hour, leaning against the truck and watching the horizon. A part of me wanted the lights to come back so I could see them in daylight and prove they were real. Another part of me was terrified that they would. Neither happened. The sun moved west, the shadows lengthened, and I drove home. I didn't stop in Dulce. I didn't talk to anyone. I went straight back to Bloomfield and spent the evening sitting on my couch, staring at nothing. 2 months passed. I worked my new route and kept my head down. I didn't talk about the lights. I didn't search for information online. I tried to let it fade into the category of strange things that happen once and never again. Then I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. When I did, the voice on the other end was quiet and measured. "Is this the contractor who worked the East Corridor in September?" I asked who was calling. He said his name was Director Morrison, and he worked for a private research group studying atmospheric phenomena in northern New Mexico. He wanted to know if I'd be willing to share my observations from that night. I asked how he got my number. He said it was a matter of public record through my employer's safety logs. I didn't believe that, but I didn't hang up. He said he wasn't with the government and he wasn't trying to cause trouble. He just wanted to talk. I told him I didn't have anything useful to share. He said that was fine, but if I changed my mind, he'd be in Farmington the following week and would meet me anywhere I felt comfortable. He gave me a callback number and ended the call. I sat there looking at my phone, trying to decide if I should block the number or call him back. I didn't call him back, but I didn't block the number either. I kept thinking about what he'd said, a private research group, atmospheric phenomena. Those were careful words, vague enough to sound legitimate, specific enough to suggest he knew exactly what he was asking about. A week later, I was at a diner in Farmington having breakfast when a man in his 50s sat down across from me without asking. He was average height, gray hair, clean-shaven, wearing jeans and a canvas jacket. He set a manila folder on the table and introduced himself as Director Morrison. I should have walked out. Instead, I asked him what he wanted. He opened the folder and slid a photo across the table. It showed a night sky with 7 bright points of light in formation. The angle was wrong for my perspective, but the configuration was identical to what I'd seen. "This was taken 3 nights before your encounter," he said. "Different location, same general area. The photographer was a graduate student doing wildlife surveys. She reported equipment failure, missing time, and a persistent headache that lasted for 2 days. He slid another photo across. This one showed a close-up of a truck dashboard. The gauges were dark. The odometer read 0. Her vehicle, photographed immediately after the incident. I stared at the photos and said nothing. He pulled out a small notebook and flipped it open. "In the last 18 months, we've documented 43 similar events within a 30-mile radius of Dulce. Lights in formation, electronic interference, time discrepancies. Witnesses report the same physical sensations: pressure in the head, vibration in the chest, a hum that isn't audible in the traditional sense." He paused and looked at me. "You're not alone, and you're not crazy. Whatever you saw, other people have seen it too." I asked him what he thought it was. He closed the notebook and leaned back. "I don't know," he said. "I've been studying this area for 6 years, and I still don't have an answer that satisfies me. What I do know is that the phenomena is consistent, repeatable, and localized. It follows patterns, it appears in clusters, and it seems to interact with electronic systems in predictable ways." I asked if he'd reported it to anyone official. He smiled, not in a friendly way, but in a way that said he'd tried, and it hadn't gone well. "The official response is always the same," he said. "Weather balloons, drones, experimental aircraft, atmospheric reflections. They'll give you a dozen explanations, and none of them will match the data." He slid a business card across the table. It had his name, a phone number, and an email address. No company logo, no website. "If you remember anything else, or if you experience anything else, call me. We're not trying to prove aliens or conspiracies. We're just trying to document what's happening and find a baseline of facts." I took the card and put it in my wallet. He stood up, left a 20 on the table for my breakfast, and walked out. I sat there for a long time, staring at the photos. I wanted to tear them up. I wanted to pretend the conversation hadn't happened, but I couldn't. Because the photo of the lights was exactly what I'd seen. Exactly. That night, I pulled out my old field notes from the September run. I'd kept them, even though I'd told myself I wouldn't. I read through the times, the locations, the sequence of events. I tried to find gaps or inconsistencies, anything that would let me doubt my own memory. There was nothing. The timeline was clear. I left Bloomfield at 7 p.m. I reached Stop 8 around 9:45. I saw the first light at 9:47. I saw 3 lights at the booster station just before 11. I saw 7 lights after my truck's electrical system glitched. And then I lost time. The clock jumped from 10:52 to 11:15 without explanation. 23 minutes I couldn't account for. I grabbed a pen and sketched the formation of the 7 lights as I remembered them. I marked the mesa, the road, the position of my truck. I drew arrows showing how they moved. All at once, east, in perfect unison. I looked at the sketch and felt the same cold knot in my stomach I'd felt that night. I folded the paper and put it in the folder with my notes. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed. Not for answers, not for protection, just for the ability to move forward without this thing eating me alive. The following week, I got another call. This time, it wasn't Morrison. It was Marcus, the other security contractor I'd met at the truck stop. He sounded rough, like he hadn't slept. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to listen without interrupting." I told him to go ahead. He took a breath. 2 nights ago, I was covering a shift for a guy who called in sick. It was the East Corridor. I know I said I'd never go back, but the money was good, and I thought maybe enough time had passed. I was wrong. He said he'd seen the lights again. Not 7 this time, 12. They'd formed 2 overlapping triangles and hovered above the same mesa I'd described. His truck had died completely. No electrical function at all. He'd sat there in the dark for 20 minutes, waiting for something to happen. The lights had descended slowly, getting closer, until he could see details. Not shapes or structures, but edges. Clean, defined edges that didn't belong to anything mechanical. He said the hum had returned, stronger than before, and he'd felt heat on his skin even though the night was cold. Then a beam of white light had dropped from one of the objects and swept across the ground in front of his truck. Not a searchlight, not a spotlight. Something else. The light had moved like it was looking for something, sweeping back and forth in a grid pattern. It had stopped on his truck and held for 5 seconds. He said he'd felt exposed, seen, known. The beam had lifted, the lights had risen, and within seconds they were gone. His truck had started immediately. He'd driven straight back to the yard and quit. He said he was done. He wasn't working that area anymore, wasn't working nights anymore, wasn't working security anymore. I asked him if he'd called Morrison. He said no. He said he didn't trust Morrison or anyone else who claimed to be researching this. He said the smart move was to walk away and never look back. I asked him why he was calling me then. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because you deserve to know it wasn't just you, and you deserve to know it's still happening. Whatever it is, it's still out there." He hung up before I could respond. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the beam of light sweeping the ground. I kept thinking about Marcus sitting in his dead truck, feeling seen. I wondered what would have happened if the light had lingered. I wondered if I'd been scanned the same way and just didn't remember it. The thought made my skin crawl. I got up at 3 a.m. and made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table and pulled up a map on my laptop. I marked every location I'd been that night. I marked where Marcus had been. I marked the spots from Morrison's photos. They all fell within a 10-mile circle centered on the mesa south of Dulce. I zoomed in on the satellite view. The mesa looked unremarkable. Red rock, sparse vegetation, no roads leading to the top. I switched to terrain view and saw that the mesa sat at the intersection of 3 ridgelines, creating a natural basin. I didn't know if that meant anything, but I noted it. I searched for geological surveys of the area and found references to old uranium mines and mineral deposits. I searched for military activity and found mentions of airspace restrictions dating back to the 1970s, but nothing current. I searched for reported UFO sightings and found the same stories I'd seen before. Lights, humming, missing time, electronic failure. I closed the laptop and rubbed my eyes. I was going in circles. I didn't have the tools or the training to make sense of this. I didn't even know what questions to ask. All I had were experiences I couldn't explain, and a growing certainty that I'd crossed paths with something that didn't want to be understood. I thought about calling Morrison. I thought about driving back out there one more time, this time at night, this time prepared with cameras and recorders and whatever else I could think of. But I didn't. Because Marcus was right. The smart move was to walk away. 3 months later, I was offered a job with a different company. Better pay, better hours, working site inspections for renewable energy projects in southern Colorado. I took it without hesitation. I gave my notice, packed my apartment, and left New Mexico in my rearview mirror. I told myself I was moving for career reasons. That was partially true. The other part, the part I didn't say out loud, was that I needed distance from that mesa and everything connected to it. I settled in Durango and started fresh. The work was good. Daytime hours, teams of people, structured schedules. No long nights alone on dirt roads. No silence that felt like it was waiting for something. I made friends. I hiked on weekends. I tried to build a normal life. For a while, it worked. I went weeks without thinking about the lights. Then I'd see something, a bright star in the wrong position, a plane holding too steady, and the memories would come flooding back. I'd feel the hum in my chest and the pressure behind my eyes, and I'd have to sit down and breathe through it. 1 year after I left New Mexico, I got an email from Morrison. The subject line read, "Update Dulce Phenomena." I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity won. He wrote that his team had documented over 100 incidents in the area since we'd last spoken. He said the frequency had increased. The lights were appearing more often, staying longer, and displaying more complex behaviors. He said they'd installed remote monitoring equipment on the mesa and captured footage that defied conventional explanation. He offered to share the data if I was interested. I wasn't interested. I wrote back and told him I'd moved on and didn't want to be involved. He responded within an hour. "I understand," he wrote. "But you should know that 3 of the witnesses we interviewed reported lasting physical effects. Headaches, vision disturbances, sleep disruption. All of them had been within close range of the lights. If you experience anything similar, document it. Your health matters more than the data." I read that email 5 times. Then I checked myself. No headaches beyond the occasional stress-related tension. No vision problems. No sleep issues beyond the normal trouble falling asleep that I'd had for years. I was fine. I told myself I was fine. But I started paying attention to details. I noticed that I couldn't look at bright lights without feeling a faint discomfort. I noticed that I avoided driving at night unless I had to. I noticed that when my phone rang from an unknown number, my first thought was always, is it him? Is it Morrison? Is it someone else from that night? I developed patterns without realizing it. I'd check the sky before getting out of my truck. I'd keep my phone charged at all times. I'd avoid open areas after dark. These weren't conscious decisions. They just became the way I moved through the world. 2 years in, I met someone. Her name was Rachel. She worked as a nurse at the hospital in Durango. We started dating and things were good. Normal. She asked about my past and I told her the clean version. I'd worked security in New Mexico, moved for a better opportunity, liked the mountains. I didn't mention the lights. I didn't mention Morrison or Marcus or the missing time. I wanted to be the person she thought I was. Someone stable, someone present, someone without a story that sounded like it belonged in a late-night radio show. But one night, we were driving back from a concert in Silverton. It was late, the road was empty, and the sky was clear. She pointed up through the windshield and said, "Look at that. What is that?" I followed her gaze and saw a bright point of light moving slowly from west to east. My hands tightened on the wheel. My chest went tight. I told myself it was a satellite. She said it was too bright for a satellite. I said maybe it was the space station. She pulled out her phone and checked an app. ISS isn't visible tonight, she said, and that's moving too slow. I pulled over. I couldn't keep driving while looking up. She got out and stood beside the truck, watching. I stayed in the cab. The light held a steady course, then stopped. Just stopped, mid-sky, as if it had hit an invisible wall. Rachel called to me. "Did you see that? It just stopped." I got out and stood next to her. The light hung there for maybe 10 seconds, then shot straight up and disappeared. No fade, no arc, just gone. Rachel laughed, nervous and excited. "That was so weird. What do you think it was?" I couldn't answer. My throat had closed up. I felt the hum again, faint but unmistakable. A vibration deep in my chest that didn't come from outside. I climbed back into the truck and started the engine. Rachel got in and looked at me. "Are you okay?" she asked. I nodded. I wasn't okay. She reached over and touched my hand. "You look pale. Do you want me to drive?" I shook my head and pulled back onto the road. We drove in silence for a while. Then she said, "Have you seen something like that before?" I wanted to lie. I wanted to say no and change the subject. But I'd been carrying this alone for too long. I told her about the night near Dulce. I kept it brief. Lights in formation, truck failure, missing time. I didn't mention Morrison or Marcus or any of the follow-up. I just gave her the core of it. When I finished, she was quiet. I couldn't read her expression in the dark. Finally, she said, "Do you believe in UFOs?" I said I didn't know what I believed. I just knew what I saw. She nodded and squeezed my hand. "Okay," she said. "Thank you for telling me." That was it. She didn't press. She didn't ask for more details. She didn't treat me like I was crazy. We got home and she made tea, and we sat on the couch and talked about other things. But something had shifted. I'd shared a piece of the story and the world hadn't ended. I felt lighter, just a little, like I'd set down a weight I didn't know I'd been carrying. A month later, Morrison called again. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered. He was brief. He said the activity had stopped completely. No lights, no reports, no equipment malfunctions. The last documented incident was 3 weeks prior. He said his team had reviewed all the data and found no explanation for why it had started or why it had stopped. He said he was suspending the research and closing the project. He thanked me for my time and wished me well. Then he said something that stuck with me. "Whatever it was, it's done with us, or we're done with it. Either way, I hope you find peace." I hung up and felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Relief that it was over. Unease that there was no resolution, no answer, no way to make sense of any of it. I thought about the lights. I thought about the hum, I thought about 23 minutes of my life I'd never get back. And I thought about all the other people who'd seen the same things and walked away with the same questions. I never went back to New Mexico. I stayed in Durango, married Rachel, and built a life that doesn't include night shifts or dirt roads or empty skies that feel too big. I still look up sometimes. I still feel a faint pull when I see a steady light where a star shouldn't be. But I don't chase it. I don't wonder. I just acknowledge it and move on. That's the only way I've found to live with it. I'm writing this because I've read other accounts, and I know how isolating it feels to carry an experience no one believes. I want you to know that if you've seen lights above a mesa, if you've felt a hum in your chest, if you've lost time you can't explain, you're not alone. It happened to me. It happened to others. And whether it's happening still or whether it stopped the way Morrison said, I can't tell you. What I can tell you is that you'll find a way to move forward. You'll build a life around it. You'll have good days and hard nights. And you'll learn that some questions don't get answered, and that's okay. I don't know what the lights were. I don't know why they appeared or what they wanted, or if they even wanted anything at all. I don't know if they were craft or natural phenomena, or something else entirely. I've stopped trying to know. I've stopped needing to know. I saw them, they saw me. And now I live in a world where that's just a fact, strange and unexplainable, but a fact nonetheless. If you work security or drive trucks or spend time alone in the high desert, be careful. Pay attention to your equipment. Trust your instincts. And if you see something that doesn't fit, don't try to get closer. Don't try to document it. Don't try to understand it. Just note it, get yourself to safety, and decide how much of your life you want to give to wondering. I gave it 2 years before I realized I had a choice. I chose to let it be. That's my ending. The lights are part of my past now, not my present. And that's enough. I drive pipeline inspection for a company that manages natural gas infrastructure across the Four Corners region. The job puts me on roads that barely qualify as roads, checking valves and monitoring pressure at remote stations scattered across New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, and Utah. Most of the work is routine. You follow a route, you log data, you move to the next site. You do it alone because the company won't pay for 2 people to do a one-person job. I've been running these routes for 11 years. I know which roads wash out in the spring, which gates need WD-40, and which ranchers will call the sheriff if they see an unfamiliar truck. I thought I knew the country. That confidence died on a January night west of Dulce. My route that week covered the Northwest Corridor, a loop that starts in Farmington, arcs through the Jicarilla Apache Nation, and terminates at a cluster of aging compressor stations near the Colorado line. The company schedules these runs every 2 weeks. In winter, they push them to nights because daytime traffic from oil and gas crews clogs the roads and adds hours to the drive. I left the yard at 6 p.m. with a full tank, a thermos of coffee, and a checklist that put me at 19 stops over 8 hours. The sun was already gone. The temperature sat at 18 degrees and dropping. I had a passenger that night, which was unusual. His name was Miles. He worked AT for the regional office and needed to install updated telemetry boxes at 3 of the stations. He'd ridden with me once before, back in October, and spent most of that trip reading on a tablet and asking questions about the equipment. He was in his late 20s, thin, quiet, the kind of person who blends into the background of a room. He climbed into the passenger seat with a laptop bag and a duffel full of cables and tools. We shook hands, and I told him we'd hit his sites first so he could finish his work and sleep the rest of the way. He said that worked for him. The first leg ran northwest on Highway 64, then branched onto 537 past Dulce. The road narrowed and the asphalt gave way to graded dirt. We passed scattered houses with lights in the windows, then nothing but open country. Miles asked how often I saw other vehicles out here. I told him it depended on the night. Weekdays, you might see a ranch truck or a fuel hauler. Weekends, almost nothing. He nodded and went back to his laptop. I kept my eyes on the road and my speed at 40. The headlights cut a tunnel through the darkness, catching reflective eyes in the brush now and then. Deer, mostly, sometimes cattle that had wandered through a bad fence. The first stop was a metering station at the junction of two service roads. I pulled up to the gate, killed the engine, and grabbed my flashlight. Miles stayed in the truck with his laptop open, running diagnostics on the telemetry feed. I walked the perimeter, checked the pressure gauges, and logged the readings in my field book. Everything normal. I climbed back in, and we moved on. The second stop was 3 miles north, a small compressor shed with a solar panel and a battery bank. Miles got out this time and swapped one of the telemetry boxes. He worked fast, fingers moving over connectors without hesitation. I stood by the truck and scanned the horizon. The sky was clear. No clouds, no moon yet, just stars packed so tight they looked like frost on black glass. We hit the third site just after 8 p.m. It was a valve cluster on a low mesa with a view that stretched for miles in every direction. Miles installed his last box while I ran my checks. When he finished, he stood beside the truck and looked out over the valley. "It's quiet out here," he said. I told him that's why I liked it. He asked if I ever got nervous being alone in the middle of nowhere. I said no. I'd been doing this long enough that the isolation felt normal. He nodded, but didn't look convinced. We got back in the truck and I started the engine. The dashboard clock read 8:14 p.m. The road dropped off the mesa and ran parallel to a dry arroyo. I kept the speed steady and watched for washouts. Miles pulled a handheld radio from his bag and clipped it to his belt. He said he liked to monitor the company frequencies when he was in the field, just to hear if anyone else was working the area. I told him he wouldn't hear much. Most of the crews ran daylight hours, and the few night shifts stayed closer to Farmington. He turned the radio on anyway and set it to scan mode. The speaker crackled with static as it cycled through channels. Nothing but dead air. We were halfway between stops 3 and 4 when I saw the light. It appeared low on the horizon to the west, rising slowly like a flare. But it wasn't a flare. Flares burn red or white, and they drift as they fall. This was orange, perfectly round, and climbing. I slowed the truck and leaned forward to get a better angle through the windshield. Miles saw it too. "What is that?" he asked. I told him I didn't know. We watched it rise until it cleared the ridgeline and hung there, motionless, about 30 degrees above the horizon. I pulled over and put the truck in park. The light didn't move. It didn't flicker. It just sat there, glowing a deep, burnt orange like a hot coal suspended in midair. I've seen Venus low in the sky. I've seen Mars and Jupiter and satellites crossing in straight lines. This wasn't any of those. It was too bright, too large, and too still. Miles grabbed a pair of binoculars from the glove box and raised them to his eyes. He adjusted the focus and went quiet. After a long moment, he lowered the binoculars and handed them to me without a word. Through the glass, the light resolved into a sphere. The edges were crisp, not blurred by atmosphere or distance. The surface looked textured, not smooth, with faint darker patches that shifted as I watched. I couldn't tell if it was rotating or if the light itself was moving across the surface. There was no visible means of support, no wings, no rotors, no exhaust, just a glowing sphere hanging in the sky like someone had pinned it there and walked away. I lowered the binoculars and glanced at Miles. His face had gone pale. "That's not a plane," he said. I agreed. It wasn't. I grabbed my phone and opened the camera app. No service out here, but the camera still worked. I aimed it at the light and zoomed in as far as the lens would go. On the screen, the sphere looked washed out, overexposed, just a bright blob against a dark background. I took 3 photos anyway. Miles pulled out his own phone and did the same. We compared the images. Both phones showed the same thing, an indistinct orange glow with no detail. "It's too bright for the sensors," Miles said. "Or it's putting out something the camera can't process right." I didn't know which was worse. The light began to move. Not fast, but deliberate. It drifted north, parallel to the road we'd just traveled, maintaining the same altitude. I started the truck and followed. Miles didn't question it. We both wanted to see where it was going. I kept my speed at 30 and my eyes on the sphere. It moved at a pace that felt intentional, like it was pacing us or leading us somewhere. The road curved and the light curved with it, staying ahead and to the left. My hands were tight on the wheel. My pulse was loud in my ears. We followed it for maybe 2 miles. Then it stopped. Just stopped, mid-sky, as if it had reached an invisible marker. I stopped the truck and we sat there, engine idling, watching. The sphere hung in the air for what felt like a full minute. Then it dropped. Not fell. Dropped. Straight down, fast, like someone had cut a string. It descended below the ridgeline and disappeared. No flash, no sound, no lingering glow. Just gone. Miles and I looked at each other. Neither of us said anything for a long moment. Finally, he asked if I wanted to keep following the route or turn around. I told him we'd keep going. We had work to finish. But my hands were shaking when I shifted into drive. I could feel adrenaline burning through my system, that jittery post-fear feeling you get after a near miss on the highway. Miles clipped his radio back to his belt and stared out the window. The static from the scanner filled the cab. I focused on the road and tried to steady my breathing. We reached Stop 4, a small pumping station with a chain-link fence and a gravel pad. I got out and ran my checks on autopilot. My mind was still on the sphere, the way it moved, the way it stopped, the way it dropped like a stone. When I climbed back into the truck, Miles was staring at his radio. "Something's wrong," he said. I asked what. He held up the device. "I've been recording the scanner feed since we left the yard. It's something I do for diagnostics, helps me track signal coverage in remote areas, but there's a gap in the file." He turned the screen toward me. The recording timeline showed a clean break. A section of the file was just missing. "How long?" I asked. He tapped the screen and brought up the metadata. 17 seconds, he said. From 8:24:11 to 8:24:28. No audio, no static, nothing. Just a blank space where data should be. I asked him what could cause that. He shook his head. "The recorder doesn't stop unless I stop it or the battery dies. And the battery is fine. It's like the device just skipped forward, or the time did." I looked at the dashboard clock. It read 8:51 p.m. I tried to remember when we'd first seen the light. Around 8:15, maybe 8:20. I asked Miles what time he'd started recording. He checked his laptop. 8:10 p.m., right after we left Stop 3. He pulled up the audio file and scrubbed through it. The recording played static, 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 then silence, a perfect 17-second gap. Then static again, picking up exactly where it should have been if those 17 seconds had never existed. I felt a coldness settle in my stomach. I asked him to play it again. He did. Same result. I asked if his laptop clock had glitched. He checked. The system time matched the truck's dashboard and my watch. No discrepancies. Miles leaned back in his seat and ran a hand through his hair. "This doesn't make sense," he said. I told him I agreed, but we both knew what we'd seen. The light. the sphere, the way it had moved and then dropped. And now a 17-second gap in the recording that coincided with the exact window when the sphere had been closest to us. Miles opened his laptop and pulled up a timeline. He marked the start of the recording, the gap, and the current time. Then he asked me to tell him everything I remembered from the moment we saw the light to the moment it disappeared. I talked him through it. We saw it around 8:20. We pulled over. We watched it through binoculars. We took photos. We followed it for about 2 miles. It stopped, hovered, then dropped. Total elapsed time, maybe 10 minutes. Miles frowned. "That matches my memory too," he said. "But if the gap is at 8:24, that puts it right in the middle of when we were following it. And if the gap is only 17 seconds, that means we lost time somewhere else." I asked what he meant. He pointed at the timeline. "We saw the light at 8:20. The gap starts at 8:24:11. That's 4 minutes of continuous recording with no issues. Then the gap. Then recording resumes at 8:24:28. But we're sitting here now at 8:51, and you said the whole encounter felt like 10 minutes. So where did the other time go?" I didn't have an answer. He didn't either. We sat in the truck with the engine running and the heater blowing warm air that didn't touch the chill in my chest. I told him we needed to finish the route. We still had 15 stops to cover, and I didn't want to explain to my supervisor why we'd abandoned the job. Miles nodded. He closed his laptop and stared out the window. The scanner on his belt crackled with static. I put the truck in gear and drove. The road stretched ahead, empty and dark. I kept my speed steady and my eyes forward. But every few minutes, I'd glance at the western horizon, half expecting to see that orange sphere rising again. It didn't. The sky stayed empty. Stop 5 was a pressure regulation point at the base of a long mesa. I parked the truck and killed the lights. Miles stayed inside while I walked the site with my flashlight. The equipment was housed in a small concrete bunker with a locked steel door. I checked the exterior gauges and made my notes. Everything read normal. The air was still. No wind, no sound, just the faint hum of the regulator doing its job. I finished quickly and headed back to the truck. As I reached for the door handle, I noticed something on the hood. A thin layer of dust had settled there. Nothing unusual for a dirt road. But in the dust, there were marks. Not handprints, not animal tracks. Lines. 3 parallel lines, each about 6 inches long, running diagonally across the hood from left to right. They were evenly spaced and perfectly straight, like someone had dragged 3 fingers through the dust with mechanical precision. I called Miles over. He climbed out and looked at the marks. "Were those there before?" he asked. I told him I didn't think so. I'd washed the truck 2 days ago and it had been relatively clean when we left the yard. The dust had accumulated during the drive, but these lines looked fresh. The edges were sharp, not blurred by wind. Miles pulled out his phone and took a photo. Then he reached out and touched one of the lines with his finger. The dust was dry and fine. He rubbed it between his thumb and forefinger and frowned. "It's just dust," he said. "But I don't know what made these." I didn't either. We stood there for a moment, staring at the marks, then got back in the truck. I didn't wipe them off. I wanted to see if they'd change or if more would appear. We drove to stop 6. The marks stayed the same. No new lines, no alterations. I kept checking them every time I got out of the truck. Miles reviewed his equipment logs and found no anomalies in the telemetry data. Everything was functioning as expected. But the 17-second gap in his audio recording sat there like a dead tooth. He kept scrubbing through the file, listening to the moment before the gap and the moment after, trying to find some audible clue. There was nothing. Just static cutting to silence and back to static. At stop 7, a small relay station on a hilltop, I noticed my watch was running slow. Not by much, maybe 30 seconds, but enough that it didn't match the truck's dashboard clock anymore. I've had this watch for 8 years. It's a basic field watch, quartz movement, battery-powered, and it's never lost time. I asked Miles to check his phone. He did. His phone matched the truck. I reset my watch and made a mental note. By stop 8, my watch was slow again. Another 30 seconds. I reset it again. Miles saw me doing it and asked what was wrong. I told him. He checked his own watch, a digital fitness tracker. It matched his phone. "Maybe your battery is dying," he said. I told him I'd replaced it 3 months ago. Stop 9 was a compressor station with a small equipment shed and a backup generator. I ran my checks while Miles walked the perimeter with his phone, testing the cell signal. There wasn't any. We were too far from the nearest tower. He came back and told me his GPS wasn't working right. The map showed our position as somewhere in the middle of a blank area, miles from any road. He refreshed it twice. Same result. I pulled out my own phone and checked. Same problem. The GPS showed us off-grid, in a location that didn't match reality. We were standing next to a road, next to a station I'd visited dozens of times, but according to both phones, we were nowhere. Miles opened his laptop and pulled up a mapping program that used cached satellite data instead of live GPS. The program loaded and showed our correct position. "So, it's not the devices," he said. "It's the GPS signal. Something's interfering with it." I asked what could do that. He said he didn't know. Military jamming, maybe, solar activity, or something else. He didn't say what something else meant, but we both knew. We'd both seen the sphere. We both knew we were dealing with something outside the normal range of experience. We finished stop 9 and moved on. The road climbed into rougher country, winding through low hills covered in juniper and sage. The temperature had dropped further. The truck's thermometer read 12 degrees. I turned the heater up and kept driving. Miles was quiet now, his earlier questions replaced by a tense silence. He kept glancing at his laptop, at the timeline, at the gap. I could see him working through it in his head, trying to find a rational explanation. I was doing the same thing, but every time I thought I had one, the memory of that orange sphere hanging in the sky would push it aside. At stop 10, I found another mark. This time it wasn't on the truck. It was on the ground beside the access road, a circular depression in the dirt about 3 feet in diameter and maybe 2 inches deep. The edges were smooth, compressed, like something heavy and round had rested there. I knelt beside it and ran my hand along the inside. The soil was packed hard. There were no footprints around it, no tire tracks, no drag marks. Just the circle, clean and isolated. Miles came over and looked at it. "How old do you think that is?" he asked. I told him I had no idea. It could have been there for days or hours. The ground was dry and the wind had been calm, so there was no way to date it by weathering. He took photos. I made a note of the location in my field book. We got back in the truck and kept moving. My watch was slow again. I stopped resetting it. I just let it drift. Miles noticed and asked why. I told him I wanted to see how much time it would lose by the end of the route. He nodded and made a note in his laptop. We were documenting everything now, treating the night like a data collection exercise. It was the only way to keep the fear at bay. Stop 11 was a remote valve station accessed by a narrow track that branched off the main road. I turned onto it and immediately felt the truck lurch. The ground was softer here, the track less maintained. I slowed to a crawl and kept the wheels in the existing ruts. Halfway to the station, the headlights caught something reflective ahead. I stopped the truck and squinted through the windshield. It was a piece of metal, flat and rectangular, lying across the track. I got out and walked toward it. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't metal, It was glass. A large pane of glass, maybe 4 feet by 2 feet, sitting in the middle of the track with no visible frame or support. I stopped a few feet away and stared at it. The glass was clean. No dust, no scratches. It reflected the truck's headlights perfectly, throwing the beam back at me. I called Miles over. He approached carefully and knelt beside it. "Where did this come from?" he asked. I told him I had no idea. There were no structures nearby, no abandoned buildings, nothing that would explain a pane of glass this size just lying in the dirt. Miles reached out and touched it. The surface was cold and smooth. He tapped it with his knuckle. It made a dull sound, not the sharp ring you'd expect from glass. "Is it glass?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't know. It looks like glass, but it doesn't sound like glass." He stood up and pulled out his phone, aiming the light at it from different angles. The pane didn't refract or distort the light. It just reflected it cleanly, like a mirror. I bent down and tried to lift one edge. It didn't budge. It was either incredibly heavy or fixed to the ground somehow. Miles tried the other side. Same result. We stood there, staring at this impossible object, and then I made a decision. "We're going around it," I said. I backed the truck up and angled off the track, cutting through the brush to bypass the glass. The truck bounced over uneven ground and scraped against low branches, but we made it past. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The glass was still there, reflecting the taillights as we pulled away. We reached the valve station and I completed my checks as fast as I could. Miles didn't get out of the truck. When I climbed back in, he was staring at his laptop screen. "The gap," he said. "It's not just in the audio. I just checked the system logs. There's a 17-second gap in the laptop's internal clock, too, from 8:24:11 to 8:24:28. The system skipped forward 17 seconds, and there's no record of what happened during that time." I felt my mouth go dry. "What does that mean?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't know. It's like time stopped for 17 seconds, or we moved through it without experiencing it. But that's not possible. Time doesn't just skip." I told him we needed to finish the route and get back to the yard. We needed to report this. He agreed. We drove back toward the main road, bypassing the glass pane again. As we passed it, I looked in the mirror one more time. It was gone. The track was empty. No glass, no marks in the dirt, nothing. I stopped the truck and got out. Miles followed. We walked back to the spot where the glass had been. There was nothing there, just dirt and rocks and tire tracks from where we'd driven around it. Miles bent down and ran his hand over the ground. "It was right here," he said. "I touched it. You tried to lift it." I nodded. I knew what we'd seen, but there was no evidence left. We stood there in the cold, our breath misting in the headlights, and I felt a deep unease settle over me. Something was playing with us. Something was testing us or studying us or just messing with the fabric of reality around us. I didn't know which, and I didn't want to know. We got back in the truck and I drove faster than I should have. I wanted distance between us and that spot. Stop 12 was a small metering station near a crossroads. I finished my work in record time. Miles stayed in the truck, typing notes into his laptop. When I returned, he showed me what he'd written. A timeline of every anomaly. The sphere, the gap, the marks on the hood, the GPS failure, my watch losing time, the glass pane. He'd logged timestamps, locations, and descriptions. "I don't know what we're dealing with," he said. "But this is data. Someone needs to see this." I asked him who. He said he didn't know, maybe the company, maybe the FAA, maybe someone else. I told him the company wouldn't care unless it affected the pipeline. The FAA wouldn't take a report seriously without radar data or multiple witnesses, and someone else was too vague to be useful. He closed the laptop and looked out the window. "Then what do we do?" he asked. I told him we finish the job and we decide later. He didn't argue. We completed stops 13 through 16 without further incident. The road was empty. The sky was dark. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of static from Miles's radio. My watch continued to drift. By the time we reached stop 17, it was running 4 minutes slow. I didn't reset it anymore. I just watched it fall further and further behind. At stop 18, a large compressor station with multiple buildings and a perimeter fence, I found a dead bird. It was lying on the gravel pad near the main gate, a raven, wings spread, head twisted at an unnatural angle. There was no blood, no sign of injury, just a dead bird in the middle of nowhere. I've seen birds die. I've seen them hit by cars, attacked by predators, brought down by disease. This didn't look like any of those. It looked like it had just stopped mid-flight and fallen from the sky. Miles came over and looked at it. "That's the third dead bird I've seen tonight," he said. I asked him when he saw the others. He pointed back along the road. "One at stop 6, one at stop 12. Both ravens. Both lying in the open like this." I hadn't noticed. I'd been too focused on the equipment and the route. But now that he mentioned it, I remembered seeing something dark on the ground at those stops. I'd assumed it was trash or a clump of brush. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked. He shrugged. "I thought it was a coincidence, but 3 dead ravens in the same night, all in the same condition." "That's not a coincidence," I agreed. We left the bird where it was and finished the stop. My hands were numb from the cold and my nerves were frayed. I just wanted this night to be over. We had one stop left. Stop 19. A remote valve cluster at the end of a long dirt road that dead-ended at the base of a mesa. I'd been to this site dozens of times. It was always the last stop on the northwest route. It was always quiet, always empty, always unremarkable. But as I turned onto the access road and the headlights swept across the landscape, I felt a knot form in my chest. Something was different. I couldn't place what, but I knew it. The road to stop 19 was rougher than I remembered. The ruts were deeper, the washouts more pronounced. I had to slow to 15 miles an hour just to keep the truck from bottoming out. Miles braced himself against the door as we bounced over rocks and dips. Neither of us spoke. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating scrub brush and scattered boulders. The mesa loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the starlit sky. We reached the valve cluster and I parked on the gravel pad. I killed the engine and the silence rushed in. No wind, no insects, no distant hum of machinery, just absolute stillness. I grabbed my flashlight and clipboard and stepped out. The cold hit me immediately, sharper than it had been all night. I zipped my jacket to the neck and walked toward the equipment. Miles stayed in the truck, his face lit by the glow of his laptop screen. The valve cluster was enclosed in a small chain-link cage with a padlocked gate. I pulled out my keys and opened the lock. The gate swung open with a creak that sounded too loud in the quiet. I stepped inside and ran my checks. Pressure normal. Flow rate normal. No leaks, no alarms. Everything was exactly as it should be. But I felt wrong. My skin prickled. My breath came short and shallow. I finished as fast as I could and backed out of the cage, pulling the gate closed behind me. As I turned toward the truck, I saw it. The orange sphere. It was back. Not on the horizon this time. Directly above the mesa, maybe 500 feet up, hanging motionless in the sky. It was larger than before, or closer, I couldn't tell which. The light it gave off was softer now, not the harsh glow we'd seen earlier, but a deep, pulsing orange that made the rocks around us look like they were on fire. I stood frozen, flashlight in hand, staring up at it. Miles got out of the truck and walked toward me. He didn't say anything. He just stood beside me and looked up. The sphere rotated slowly, revealing the same textured surface we'd seen through the binoculars. But now I could see details. Dark patches that moved across the surface like clouds. Faint lines that crisscrossed the sphere in geometric patterns. And at the center, a brighter core that pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. I don't know how I knew it was synced to my heartbeat, but I did. I could feel it in my chest, a pressure that rose and fell with each beat. "Do you feel that?" Miles asked, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded. He pressed a hand to his chest. "It's like it's pulling at me, not physically, but I don't know how to explain it." I knew exactly what he meant. It was a gravitational pull, but not on my body, on something deeper. My thoughts felt sluggish. My sense of time stretched and compressed. I tried to check my watch, but couldn't make my arm move. I just stood there, locked in place, staring at the sphere. Then it descended, slowly, deliberately, lowering itself until it was level with the top of the mesa. The light intensified, casting long shadows across the ground. The pressure in my chest increased. My ears popped. I heard a low hum, not from the sphere, but from everywhere at once. It resonated in my bones, in my teeth, in the rocks beneath my feet. Miles grabbed my arm. "We need to go," he said. His voice sounded distant, muffled, like he was speaking through water. I tried to move. My legs wouldn't respond. I looked down and saw that my shadow was wrong. It wasn't stretching away from the light. It was bending toward the sphere, pulled upward, like it was trying to detach from my body. Miles's shadow was doing the same thing. I watched, paralyzed, as the shadows lifted off the ground, rising a few inches, then a foot, stretching toward the light like smoke. "What the hell is happening?" Miles shouted. His voice broke through the fog in my head. I forced myself to move, dragging one foot forward, then the other. It felt like walking through deep water. We stumbled toward the truck. The shadows followed, still attached, but straining upward. I reached for the door handle and missed. My depth perception was off. Everything looked flat, two-dimensional. I tried again and managed to grab the handle. I yanked the door open and fell into the driver's seat. Miles collapsed into the passenger side. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine cranked but didn't start. I tried again. Same result. The battery was fine, the fuel pump was priming, but the engine wouldn't catch. Miles pulled out his phone. The screen was black. He pressed the power button. Nothing. "It's dead," he said. "It was at 60% a minute ago." I checked mine. Same thing. Black screen. Unresponsive. I threw it on the seat and tried the ignition again. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. The dashboard lights flickered. The radio came to life, blasting static at full volume. I reached for the volume knob, but before I could turn it, a voice cut through the noise. It wasn't a human voice. It was layered, multiple tones speaking in unison, forming words I could understand but shouldn't have been able to. 17, it said. Then again, 17, and again. 17. Over and over, the same word, each repetition perfectly timed, perfectly synchronized. I looked at Miles. His face was pale, his eyes wide. The voice stopped. The static resumed. Then the engine roared to life on its own. I didn't wait. I threw the truck into reverse and gunned it. The tires spun in the gravel, found traction, and we shot backward. I cranked the wheel, shifted into drive, and floored it. The truck fishtailed on the loose dirt but straightened out. I kept my foot down, racing back along the access road, hitting ruts hard enough to slam my head into the roof. Miles braced himself against the dashboard, not saying a word. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The sphere was rising again, climbing back above the mesa. But it wasn't alone anymore. There were others. 3 more spheres identical to the first, forming a triangle around it. They hovered for a moment, then shot upward in perfect unison, accelerating so fast they became streaks of light. And then they were gone. The sky was empty. The pressure in my chest vanished. The hum stopped. Everything went silent except for the sound of the truck's engine and the rattle of loose tools in the bed. I didn't slow down until we hit the main road. I drove east toward Farmington, pushing the speed as high as I dared on the dirt. Miles was typing on his laptop, his fingers shaking. "The clock," he said. "Check the clock." I looked at the dashboard. It read 11:02 p.m. I looked at my watch. It read 10:58 p.m., still running slow. Miles held up his laptop. The system time read 11:02 p.m. "We were at stop 19 for 45 minutes, he said, but it felt like 5. I did the math in my head. We'd arrived at the valve cluster around 10:15. If we'd left at 11:02, that was 47 minutes. But I couldn't account for most of that time. I remembered getting out of the truck, checking the equipment, seeing the sphere, trying to start the truck, hearing the voice, and then driving away. That sequence felt like it had taken 10 minutes, maybe 15 at most, not 47. Miles pulled up his audio recording. It was still running. He scrubbed to the section covering stop 19. The file showed a gap. Not 17 seconds this time. 32 minutes. From 10:17 to 10:49, the recording was blank. Just silence. "We lost time again," he said. And this time it was a lot more than 17 seconds. I told him I knew. I could feel it. There was a gap in my memory, a blank space where something should have been but wasn't. I tried to remember the details. Standing by the truck, looking at the sphere, the shadows lifting, getting in the truck, the voice. But between those moments, there were holes. Missing pieces I couldn't retrieve no matter how hard I tried. We reached the highway, and I turned north toward Farmington. The road was paved now, smooth and familiar. I pushed the truck to 70 and kept it there. Miles closed his laptop and stared out the window. "What did that voice say?" he asked. I told him. 17. He nodded slowly. 17 seconds. That's what we lost the first time. Why would it repeat that number? I didn't have an answer. Maybe it was a message. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe it meant nothing at all. We drove in silence for the next 20 miles. My hands ached from gripping the wheel. My jaw hurt from clenching my teeth. Every shadow on the side of the road made me flinch. Every distant light on the horizon made my heart race. I kept expecting to see the spheres again, rising from behind a ridge or dropping from the sky. But the night stayed empty. We passed through Dulce just after midnight. The gas station was closed. The streets were dark. We didn't stop. Halfway to Farmington, Miles's phone buzzed. He picked it up and stared at the screen. "It's working again," he said. He checked the battery. 47%. "That's impossible," he said. It was dead, completely dead. I told him to check mine. He did. Same thing. My phone was on, showing 52% battery, as if it had never died. Miles opened his recording app and checked the file. The 32-minute gap was still there, but the recording had resumed automatically at 10:49, exactly when we'd left the valve cluster. He played it back. Static, silence, static. No voice, no hum, just the gap. We reached the yard at 1:30 a.m. I parked the truck in my usual spot and killed the engine. We sat there for a moment, neither of us moving. Finally, Miles spoke. "What do we tell them?" I asked him what he thought we should tell them. He shook his head. "I don't know. If we report this as it happened, they'll think we're lying or crazy. If we don't report it, and something shows up on the telemetry data or the route logs, they'll want to know why we didn't say anything." I told him we'd write up the facts. Equipment functioning normally, route completed, minor GPS anomalies. We wouldn't mention the spheres or the voice or the missing time unless directly asked. He didn't like it, but he agreed. We got out of the truck and I walked around to check the hood. The 3 parallel lines were still there, etched into the dust. I took a photo with my phone. Miles did the same. Then I wiped the hood clean with my sleeve. No point leaving evidence we couldn't explain. We grabbed our gear and headed to the office. The night supervisor was at his desk, working through a stack of paperwork. He looked up as we walked in. "How'd it go?" he asked. I handed him my clipboard. "Route complete. All stations normal." He scanned the logs and nodded. "Good. Miles, you get those telemetry boxes installed?" Miles said yes. The supervisor made a note and told us to go home. We walked out to the parking lot. Miles stopped by his car and looked at me. "Are we going to talk about this?" he asked. I told him I didn't know. I needed time to process it. He said he felt the same way. We exchanged numbers and agreed to touch base in a few days. Then he got in his car and drove away. I stood there alone, staring up at the sky. It was clear and full of stars. Nothing moved, nothing glowed orange, just a normal night. I got in my truck and drove home. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment. The sphere rising, the marks on the hood, the glass pane that disappeared, the dead ravens, the shadows lifting, the voice repeating 17, and the gaps in time. 2 gaps, 17 seconds, and 32 minutes. 57 seconds total that I couldn't account for. 57 seconds where I existed but had no memory of existing. I got up at dawn and made coffee. I pulled out my field notes and reviewed them. Everything looked normal on paper. Pressure readings, timestamps, station IDs. A routine run. I checked my phone and scrolled through the photos I'd taken. The images of the orange sphere were still there, still overexposed and useless. The photo of the marks on the hood was clear. 3 parallel lines, evenly spaced, cutting through the dust. I sent it to Miles with a text. "Still real?" He responded immediately. "Still real. I've been reviewing my data. We need to meet." We met at a diner in Farmington that afternoon. Miles brought his laptop and a folder full of printouts. He looked like he hadn't slept either. His eyes were red, his hair uncombed. He ordered coffee and spread the printouts across the table. "I pulled every data file from last night," he said. "Telemetry logs, GPS coordinates, audio recordings, system timestamps. And I found something." He slid a printout toward me. It was a graph showing GPS coordinates over time. Most of the route showed a clean line, our position updating every second as expected. But there were 2 sections where the line broke. "These gaps correspond exactly to the missing time," he said. 17 seconds at 8:24 and 32 minutes starting at 10:17. I studied the graph. During the gaps, the GPS showed us in the same position, as if we'd stopped moving. But I knew we hadn't stopped. During the first gap, we'd been following the sphere. During the second, we'd been at stop 19. "What does this mean?" I asked. Miles leaned back and rubbed his face. "I think we experienced some kind of temporal displacement. Time moved forward for the rest of the world, but for us, it either stopped or we moved through it without being aware of it. The devices recorded the gap because they were with us. They experience the same displacement. I asked him if that was even possible. He said he didn't know. He wasn't a physicist, but he'd done some research overnight and found papers on time dilation, relativistic effects, and quantum mechanics. None of it fit perfectly, but the general concept was there. Under certain conditions, time could behave differently for different observers. But those conditions usually involve massive gravity or near-light speeds, he said, not a glowing sphere in the New Mexico desert. I asked him what he thought the sphere was. He shook his head. I don't know, but whatever it was, it had the ability to manipulate our perception of time, our electronics, and maybe even physical objects. The glass pane, the marks on the hood, the dead birds. Those aren't natural phenomena. I agreed. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing. Finally, I asked the question we'd both been avoiding. Do we report this? Miles sighed. To who? The company won't care. The FAA will dismiss it. The police will think we're crazy. We don't have evidence that would stand up to scrutiny. Overexposed photos, data gaps that could be explained as equipment failure, and a story about glowing spheres and missing time. It sounds insane. I told him it didn't matter how it sounded. It happened. He nodded. I know, but knowing it happened and proving it happened are two different things. He pulled out another printout. This one was a screenshot from an online forum. I found this last night, he said. It's a post from 3 years ago. A truck driver reported seeing orange lights near Dulce. He described them the same way we did. Round, bright, moving in formation. He also reported missing time and equipment failure. There were a dozen replies, most of them skeptical, but a few from other people who said they'd seen similar things in the same area. He showed me more screenshots. Post after post, dating back over a decade, all describing encounters near Dulce. Lights in the sky, dead electronics, time gaps. Some were clearly exaggerated or fabricated, but others had the same sober, factual tone as Miles's notes. We're not the first, he said, and we won't be the last. I asked him what he planned to do with the information. He said he was going to compile it, document everything, cross-reference the reports, and see if there were patterns. Not to prove anything, but to understand. I told him I'd help if he wanted. He said he'd appreciate that. We finished our coffee and left. As I walked to my truck, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief that I wasn't alone in this. Dread that it meant the phenomenon was real, persistent, and unexplained. I went back to work the next week. My supervisor assigned me a different route, the southern corridor covering sites between Farmington and Gallup. I didn't complain. I didn't want to go back to the northwest corridor. Not yet, maybe not ever. Miles took a few days off and then returned to his office job. We texted occasionally, sharing updates. He found more reports online. I found more dead birds on my new route. 3 ravens over the course of 2 weeks, all lying in the open with no visible injuries. I stopped mentioning them in my logs. They felt like markers now, signs that something was watching or passing through. A month after our encounter, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. Is this the driver who ran the Northwest Corridor on January 14th? I asked who was calling. He identified himself as Agent Brennan, Department of Energy. He said he was following up on some anomalous telemetry data flagged by a regional monitoring station. He wanted to know if I'd noticed anything unusual during my route that night. I hesitated. Then I asked him what kind of anomalies he was referring to. He said there had been brief interruptions in satellite GPS coverage and unexplained electromagnetic readings in the area west of Dulce. He asked if my equipment had experienced any malfunctions. I told him we'd had minor GPS issues, but nothing that affected the work. He asked if I'd seen any aircraft or unusual lights. I told him no, it was a lie, and he probably knew it. But I wasn't ready to hand over my story to a government agent I'd never met. He thanked me for my time and gave me a number to call if I remembered anything else. I saved the number, but never called. Miles got a similar call a week later, also from someone claiming to be with the Department of Energy. He told them the same thing I did. Minor GPS issues, nothing unusual. We compared notes and decided to keep our data private. If the government was already aware of the phenomenon, they didn't need our help. And if they weren't, we didn't want to become test subjects or case studies. 3 months passed. I ran my routes, logged my data, and went home. Life returned to a semblance of normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not by people, but by something else. Sometimes I'd catch a flash of orange in the corner of my eye, only to turn and see nothing. Sometimes I'd hear a faint hum when the wind was still. And sometimes, late at night, I'd check the sky and see a single bright point of light that didn't move like a star or a plane. Miles called me in April with news. He'd finished compiling the reports and cross-referencing the data. He'd found a pattern. The sightings clustered around 3 locations: the mesa west of Dulce, a dry lake bed near the Colorado border, and a canyon system south of Aztec. All 3 sites were remote. All 3 had minimal human activity, and all 3 were within 30 miles of each other. He'd also found something else. Every report that mentioned missing time included a reference to a specific duration: 17 seconds, 34 seconds, 51 seconds, all multiples of 17. "What does that mean?" I asked. He said he didn't know, but it suggested the phenomenon was consistent, measurable, and possibly intentional. "Intentional how?" I asked. He paused. "I think whatever's causing this is communicating. The number 17 isn't random, it's a message, or a signature." I asked him what he thought it meant. He said he had a theory, but it was speculative. I told him to say it anyway. 17 is a prime number, he said. Primes are often used in communication because they're universal. Any advanced intelligence would recognize them. The fact that our time gaps are multiples of 17 suggests that the displacement isn't accidental. It's controlled, and whoever's controlling it wants us to notice. I let that sink in. The idea that something was deliberately taking seconds or minutes from our lives and marking them with a mathematical signature was both terrifying and fascinating. I asked him if he'd shared this with anyone else. He said no. He didn't trust anyone else with it. I told him I understood. We agreed to keep documenting and to stay in touch. But we also agreed to be careful. Whatever we'd encountered, it was still out there, and it knew we'd seen it. I never went back to Stop 19. I requested a permanent reassignment to the southern routes, and my supervisor approved it without question. Miles left the company a few months later and took a job with a tech firm in Albuquerque. We still text occasionally, sharing articles or data, but we don't talk about that night unless we have to. It's easier that way. I've thought a lot about the voice we heard. 17, repeated over and over, like a chant or a countdown. I've thought about the shadows lifting off the ground, straining toward the light. And I've thought about the 32 minutes we lost. The blank space in our memory that should contain something but doesn't. I've tried to fill that space with guesses and theories, but nothing fits. It's just a void, a gap, a missing piece of my life that I'll never get back. Sometimes I wonder what happened during those 32 minutes. Were we conscious but unable to remember? Were we taken somewhere and returned? Or did time simply fold around us, compressing our experience into a moment while the world moved on? I don't know. And the not knowing is the hardest part. What I do know is this: there's something in the desert west of Dulce. Something that appears as orange spheres in the sky. Something that can stop time or at least make you lose track of it. Something that leaves marks on metal and glass and dirt roads and dead birds in its wake. I don't know what it is or where it comes from or what it wants, but I know it's real. Miles knows it's real, and somewhere out there, other people know it too. If you drive through that area at night and you see an orange light on the horizon, don't follow it. If your GPS starts malfunctioning and your electronics begin to fail, turn around. And if you hear a voice repeating a number, get as far away as you can. Because whatever's out there, it doesn't follow the rules we understand. It operates outside of time, outside of physics, outside of explanation. And once it notices you, it doesn't forget. I still work pipeline inspection. I still drive alone through remote areas. But I stay away from the Northwest Corridor. I stay away from the mesa. And when I'm out there at night and the sky is clear and the stars are bright, I keep my eyes on the road. I don't look up, because I know what's up there. Or at least I know that something is. And I've learned that some things are better left unseen. Miles sent me a final message last month. It was a screenshot of his audio file from that night, the one with the 17-second gap. He'd been running it through analysis software, trying to find any trace of sound or data in the silence, and he found something. Not a voice or a hum, but a pattern, a series of pulses, so faint they were almost imperceptible, repeating at regular intervals. He counted them. 17 pulses, 17 beats, 17 echoes of something we couldn't hear, but that was there nonetheless. It left a mark, his message said, in the data, in the time, in us. We'll never know what it was, but we'll always know it was real. He was right. We'll never know, but we'll carry it with us. The missing seconds, the lost minutes, the orange spheres and the voice and the gaps in our memory. They're part of us now, woven into our lives like scars. And whenever I check the time and my watch is running slow, I think of that night. I think of 17 seconds. And I wonder if somewhere out there, something is counting down to the next encounter. I bought a new watch 6 months after the incident. Digital, atomic clock synchronized. Accurate to a fraction of a second. It's never lost time. Not once. But I still check it compulsively, multiple times a day, comparing it against my phone, against the truck's dashboard, against any clock I pass. The numbers always match now, but the habit remains. It's a reminder that time isn't as fixed as I used to believe. Last year, I drove past Dulce on my way to Colorado. It was daylight, mid-afternoon, the sun high and bright. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. But as I passed the turnoff to that county road, the one that leads to the Northwest Corridor, I felt it, that same pressure in my chest. Brief, maybe 2 seconds, like someone had pressed a hand against my ribs and then let go. I checked my watch immediately, still synchronized, still accurate. But my heart was racing. I called Miles that night and told him about it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he'd felt something similar 3 weeks earlier while driving through Farmington. A sudden pressure, a moment of disorientation, and then nothing. His watch had been fine too. We talked about what it might mean. Maybe it was just stress, our brains creating phantom sensations because of what we'd been through. Or maybe it was something else, a residual effect, a connection that hadn't fully severed. He told me he'd started wearing a voice recorder on his keychain, always running, just in case. I asked him if he'd found any more gaps. He said no, just hours and hours of normal ambient sound. Traffic, conversations, silence. Nothing unusual, but he kept recording anyway. "If it happens again," he said, "I want to catch it. I want proof that I'm not imagining this." I understood completely. I'd started carrying a backup phone in my truck, fully charged, always ready. Not for emergencies, for documentation. The thing about experiencing something like this is that it changes how you see the world. Every unusual light becomes a potential encounter. Every electronic glitch becomes suspicious. Every moment of confusion or lost focus makes you wonder if time just skipped and you didn't notice. You start seeing patterns where there might not be any. You start questioning your own memory, and you start realizing how fragile our understanding of reality actually is. I don't talk about it with anyone except Miles. What would I say? I lost time in the desert and heard a voice? People would assume I'd fallen asleep at the wheel or had some kind of medical episode. And maybe they'd be right to assume that. Maybe that's the rational explanation. But I know what I experienced. I know what we both experienced. The data doesn't lie. The gaps are real. The pulses are real. Whatever took those seconds from us was real. Sometimes I think about the others. The truck driver who posted about orange lights 3 years before us. The people who replied to his post, sharing their own stories. The dozens of reports Miles compiled. How many of us are out there, carrying these experiences, wondering if we're alone? How many people have seen those spheres and never said a word because they knew no one would believe them? I'm writing this because I need to. Because keeping it locked inside feels like letting it win, whatever it is. And because maybe someone else will read this and recognize their own experience in mine. If you've lost time you can't explain, if you've seen lights that don't behave like anything from this world, if you've heard sounds that shouldn't exist, you're not crazy. You're not alone. It happened. It's happening. And we're all trying to make sense of it with the limited tools we have. The mesa west of Dulce is still there. The roads still run through empty country. The pipeline still needs inspection. Life goes on. But something changed that night in January. Time proved itself malleable. Reality proved itself stranger than I'd ever imagined. And I proved to myself that I could survive an encounter with something I'll never understand. I keep Miles's message saved on my phone, the screenshot of the 17 pulses. I look at it sometimes when I can't sleep. It's proof. Not the kind that would convince a skeptic, but the kind that matters to me. We didn't imagine it. We didn't hallucinate it. We experienced something real, something documented. Something that left traces in machines and in us. If I had one piece of advice for anyone working alone in remote areas, it would be this. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If you see something that doesn't make sense, don't try to rationalize it in the moment. Just get yourself to safety and process it later. Your life is worth more than curiosity. And if you see an orange sphere in the New Mexico desert, remember, 17 seconds might not sound like much. But those 17 seconds could be the beginning of something that changes everything you thought you knew about time, space, and what's possible in this world. I'm a wildlife biologist working under contract with the Bureau of Land Management. My job puts me in remote areas of New Mexico for weeks at a time, conducting surveys on elk migration patterns and predator activity. Most of the work is observation and data collection. I set up trail cameras, document tracks, and map movement corridors across public land. The pay is modest, but the solitude suits me. I've been doing this for 7 years, and I thought I'd seen everything the high desert could throw at me. I was wrong. In early March, I was assigned to survey a section of land west of Dulce, a sprawling area of mesas, arroyos, and scattered pinon juniper woodland that sees almost no human traffic. The BLM had received reports of unusual elk behavior in the region, animals moving in patterns that didn't match historical data. My job was to spend 2 weeks in the field, establish monitoring points, and try to figure out what was disrupting the normal migration routes. I packed my truck with gear, drove out from Farmington, and set up a base camp near a dry wash about 15 miles from the nearest maintained road. The first week was unremarkable. I hiked transects, placed cameras, and logged observations. The elk were present but skittish, breaking into small scattered groups instead of the larger herds typical for the season. I found tracks leading in circles, bedding sites abandoned after a single night, and fresh scat in areas that should have been empty. Something was pushing them out of their normal range, but I couldn't identify what. No signs of large predators, no evidence of disease, no human disturbance. Just nervous animals refusing to settle. On the 8th night, I met Lydia. She was a geologist working for a private mineral survey company, contracted to map subsurface features for a potential mining operation. We crossed paths at a BLM access point where I'd stopped to refill water from a storage tank. She pulled up in a white Jeep covered in red dust, stepped out, and introduced herself. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, practical clothes, and the kind of direct manner you develop when you work alone most of the time. We talked for a few minutes about the area, the roads, and the weather. She mentioned she was camped about 6 miles south of my location and would be in the field for another week. We exchanged contact information in case either of us ran into trouble. Cell service was non-existent out there, but we both carried satellite communicators for emergencies. 2 nights later, she called me on the SATCOM. It was just after 9 p.m., and I was reviewing my field notes by lantern light. Her voice came through scratchy but clear. "Jasper, this is Lydia. Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" I stepped out of my tent and looked up. The sky was clear, the stars dense and bright, and low on the western horizon, a single point of light that was too bright to be a star and too steady to be a plane. I told her I saw it. She asked if I had binoculars. I did. I grabbed them and focused on the light. Through the glass, it resolved into a sphere, white and luminous, hovering maybe 30 degrees above the horizon. It wasn't moving, no drift, no flicker, just a fixed point burning against the darkness. I asked Lydia where she was positioned. She gave me her coordinates. We were about 6 miles apart, both facing west, both looking at the same object. "What do you think it is?" she asked. I told her I didn't know. I've seen Venus, I've seen the International Space Station, I've seen aircraft at distance. This didn't match any of those. It was too low, too bright, and too still. We stayed on the line and watched. After about 5 minutes, the light began to change. It brightened, pulsing 3 times in slow succession, each pulse lasting maybe 2 seconds. Then it split, not gradually, but instantly. One light became 3, arranged in a perfect horizontal line. The spacing was even, the brightness identical. I lowered the binoculars and stared. Lydia's voice came through the comm. "Are you seeing this?" I told her I was. She said her hands were shaking and she was going to grab her camera. I told her to do it and I'd keep watching. The 3 lights held their formation for maybe 30 seconds. Then they began to move. Not together, but independently. The center light stayed fixed while the 2 outer lights drifted apart, widening the formation. They moved smoothly, no jerking or wobbling, just a steady glide. When they'd separated to what looked like a 1/4 mile apart, they stopped. All 3 hung there, motionless, forming a wide triangle against the night sky. I felt my pulse quicken. This wasn't aircraft. Aircraft don't split into 3 pieces and hover. Lydia came back on the line. I got photos, but they're not showing anything. Just overexposed white blobs. This thing is putting out too much light for my sensor. I told her the same thing had happened when I'd tried photographing unusual lights before. Whatever this was, it didn't record well. She asked if I thought we should drive closer. I hesitated. Every instinct told me to stay put. But curiosity and professional obligation pushed back. We were both scientists. We documented phenomena. This qualified. I told her I'd meet her at the access point in 20 minutes. I grabbed my pack, a flashlight, my field notebook, and a handheld GPS. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. The lights were still visible to the west as I drove. 3 steady points maintaining their triangle formation. The road was rough, a 2-track trail that wound through low hills and crossed shallow washes. I kept my speed at 30 and watched the lights. They didn't move. By the time I reached the access point, Lydia was already there. Her Jeep was parked with the engine running and the headlights off. She stepped out as I pulled up. "They're still there," she said, pointing west. I got out and looked. The triangle was lower now, closer to the horizon, but still visible. We stood in the cold and watched. The temperature had dropped into the 20s, and our breath misted in the air. Lydia had a DSLR camera with a telephoto lens. She raised it and tried to focus on the lights. "I can't get a clear image," she said. "It's like the camera won't lock focus. It keeps hunting." I asked if she could shoot manual. She switched modes and tried again. Better, but the exposure is still blown out. We decided to drive west on a service road that would get us closer. I led in my truck. Lydia followed in her Jeep. The road was barely a road, more like a cleared path through the brush. We climbed a low ridge and the lights came back into full view, now almost directly ahead of us. They were lower, maybe 15 degrees above the horizon, and brighter than before. As we descended the far side of the ridge, the center light began to pulse again. Slow, rhythmic, 3 beats, and then a pause. 3 beats, and then a pause. I stopped the truck. Lydia pulled up beside me and rolled down her window. "What is it doing?" she asked. I told her I didn't know. We watched the pulsing pattern repeat 4 times. Then all 3 lights moved. They drifted together, converging on the center point. When they met, they merged. 3 became 1. The single light held for a moment, then dropped straight down below the ridgeline and disappeared. We sat in silence. The night was suddenly very quiet. No wind, no distant animal sounds, just the idle of our engines. Lydia opened her door and stepped out. I did the same. We walked to the front of the vehicles and stared at the empty horizon. "Where did it go?" she asked. I told her it looked like it had landed or dropped behind the ridge. She asked if we should go look. I said no, not at night. Not without knowing what we were walking into. She agreed. We stood there for another minute, then got back in our vehicles. As I reached for my door handle, every hair on my arms stood up. A faint hum filled the air. Not loud, but pervasive. It felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. I looked at Lydia. She heard it too. Her face had gone pale. The hum grew deeper, resonating in my chest. My truck's headlights flickered. Lydia's Jeep did the same. Then both engines died. Just cut out, no sputter, no warning. The headlights went dark. The dashboard went black. Total silence except for the hum. I tried the ignition. Nothing. No crank, no click, nothing. I looked over at Lydia. She was doing the same, turning her key with no result. The hum intensified. I could feel it in my teeth, in my bones. And then the light appeared again. Not on the horizon, directly above us, a single white sphere, maybe 200 feet up, perfectly centered between our 2 vehicles. It hung there, motionless, washing the area in a cold white glow that made the landscape look like a photographic negative. Lydia got out of her Jeep and backed away from it, her eyes locked on the sphere. I did the same. We met between the vehicles, neither of us speaking. The sphere began to descend. Slowly, deliberately, lowering itself until it was maybe 50 feet above the ground. It was huge, easily the size of a small house, and the surface looked textured, not smooth. Darker patches moved across it like oil on water. The hum reached a pitch that made my vision blur. I grabbed Lydia's arm. "We need to move," I said. She nodded, but didn't take her eyes off the sphere. We backed toward the ridge we'd come over, putting distance between us and the object. As we moved, the sphere stopped descending. It held at 50 feet and began to rotate. Slow at first, then faster. The rotation revealed more details, geometric patterns etched into the surface, lines that intersected at precise angles, and at the center, a darker core that pulsed in time with the hum. I felt a pressure building in my head, a sensation like being underwater and needing to surface. Lydia pressed her hands to her temples. "It's too loud," she said, even though the hum wasn't loud in the traditional sense. It was just overwhelming. Then it split again. But this time it didn't split into 3. It split into dozens. The sphere fractured like a glass ball shattering in reverse, breaking into small points of light that scattered in all directions. They moved outward in a perfect expanding sphere, each point maintaining equal distance from the others. It was like watching a firework explode, except there was no sound other than the hum, no trail, no fade. The points reached what must have been 100 yards in radius, then stopped. They hovered, forming a dome of light over us and our vehicles. I looked at Lydia. Her face reflected the glow, her expression caught between awe and terror. "What do we do?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. We were inside a structure of light, surrounded by points that defied physics. I reached for my SATCOM. The screen was dead. I tried the power button, nothing. Lydia checked her phone. Same result, we were cut off. The points began to move again. Not away, but in a coordinated pattern. They swirled, flowing like birds in a murmuration, creating complex shapes and then dissolving them. Spirals, grids, waves, each pattern held for a few seconds before shifting to the next. I've seen natural phenomena do beautiful things. I've seen murmurations, I've seen auroras. This was different. This felt intentional. Designed. Like watching a language we couldn't read. Then the points converged. All of them rushing back toward the center, reforming the single sphere directly above us. The hum cut out. The silence that followed was so complete it felt like a physical pressure. The sphere hung there, glowing softly, and for the first time since this started I felt calm. Not safe, but calm. Like whatever this was, it had finished doing what it came to do. The sphere rose. Straight up, accelerating smoothly until it was a pinpoint, then nothing. The stars returned. The cold returned, and our vehicles started. Both of them at the exact same moment, engines turning over without anyone touching a key. The headlights came on, the dashboards lit up. Everything functioned as if nothing had happened. Lydia and I stood there, staring at each other. Finally, she spoke. "Did that just happen?" I nodded. She walked to her Jeep and checked the controls. Everything worked. I did the same with my truck. Normal function, no error codes, no indication of failure. But I looked at the clock. It read 11:47 p.m. I checked my watch. It read 10:32 p.m., over an hour of discrepancy. I called to Lydia. "What time does your clock say?" She checked. 11:47. I showed her my watch. She pulled out her wrist unit. It matched mine. 10:32. We'd lost time. Over an hour, just gone. Neither of us remembered anything between the sphere reforming and the engine starting, but according to the vehicle clocks, that gap was 75 minutes. I felt sick, not physically ill, but fundamentally unsettled. Time didn't just skip. Memory didn't just vanish. But here we were, with proof that both had happened. We didn't sleep that night. We drove back to the access point and sat in Lydia's Jeep with the heater running, trying to piece together what had happened. She pulled out her camera and reviewed the photos. Empty frames, black screens with faint white smudges that could have been anything. My GPS log showed our position correctly until 10:31 p.m., then nothing until 11:48 p.m. A gap that matched our missing time almost exactly. Lydia opened her field notebook and started writing. I did the same. We documented everything we could remember. The single light, the split into three, the triangle formation, the hum, the engines dying, the sphere overhead, the points of light forming patterns, and then the blank space where our memory should have been. We compared notes. Our accounts matched perfectly up until the sphere reformed. After that, nothing, just a void. "Do you feel different?" Lydia asked. I considered the question. My head ached slightly. My mouth was dry. But beyond that, I felt normal. Tired, but normal. I told her as much. She said she felt the same. We checked each other for marks or injuries. Nothing. No burns, no bruises, no unexplained wounds. Just two people who'd experienced something impossible and walked away, apparently unharmed. As dawn approached, we made a decision. We'd continue our work, but stay in communication. If either of us experienced anything else unusual, we'd contact the other immediately. And we'd document everything, no matter how minor. We wouldn't report this to our employers yet. We needed more data, more time to process. Lydia asked if I thought we should leave the area. I told her I didn't know. Part of me wanted to pack up and drive back to civilization, but another part, the scientist part, wanted to stay, wanted to understand. We separated at sunrise. I drove back to my camp and tried to work. I checked my trail cameras and found something odd. 3 of them, positioned in a rough triangle about a mile apart, had stopped recording at 10:29 p.m. the previous night. They resumed at 11:49 p.m. The gap matched our missing time. But these cameras ran on independent batteries and separate timers. There was no reason for all 3 to fail simultaneously. I pulled the SD cards and reviewed the footage on my laptop. The files showed a clean break. Recording, then nothing, then recording again. I marked the camera locations on my map. They formed a triangle. I measured the distances. Each camera was approximately 1.2 miles from the others. An equilateral triangle. I thought about the 3 lights we'd seen in formation. I thought about the sphere splitting and converging. Patterns. Everything about this was patterns. I spent the day hiking to each camera location looking for signs of disturbance. At the first camera, I found a circular depression in the soil about 6 feet from the device. The depression was maybe 4 feet across and an inch deep. The edges were sharp and the soil inside was compressed, like something heavy had rested there. I photographed it, measured it, and took a soil sample. The second camera had a similar depression, same size, same characteristics. So did the third. I called Lydia on the SATCOM. She was at her survey site running magnetometer readings. I told her what I'd found. She asked me to send her the coordinates. I did. She went quiet for a moment, then said, "Jasper, I'm getting anomalous readings at 3 points on my grid. Strong magnetic deviations, way outside normal range, and they're arranged in a triangle." She gave me her coordinates. I plotted them. Her triangle overlapped with mine. The depressions I'd found were at 3 of her magnetic anomaly points. We were on to something. Something had been here in this specific area, and it had left physical evidence. The cameras, the depressions, the magnetic readings. This wasn't just lights in the sky. This was something that interacted with the environment. Lydia said she was going to expand her magnetic survey to cover a wider area. I told her I'd set up more cameras and see if the pattern repeated. That night, I stayed awake. I positioned myself on a small rise with a clear view to the west and kept watch. The sky was clear, the air was still, and the temperature dropped below freezing. I sat in my truck with the engine off, wrapped in a sleeping bag, binoculars in hand. Hours passed. Nothing. Just stars and silence. I checked my watch every 15 minutes. Time moved normally. Around 3 a.m., I saw it. Not to the west this time, to the north. A single point of light rising slowly from behind a mesa. It climbed until it was about 45 degrees above the horizon, then stopped. I raised the binoculars. Same white sphere, same steady glow. I reached for my SATCOM to call Lydia, but before I could, the light split. One became 3 just like before. Horizontal line, even spacing, identical brightness. I grabbed my camera and tried to photograph it. The viewfinder showed nothing but blown-out white. I adjusted the exposure, dialed it down as far as it would go. Better, but still overexposed. I took a dozen shots anyway. The 3 lights held formation for maybe 2 minutes, then began to move. They drifted apart, forming a triangle, wider than the previous night, covering more sky. I estimated the angular separation and tried to calculate distance. If each light was a mile apart, they'd have to be close, maybe 5 miles away. If they were farther apart, they'd be much more distant. I had no way to know. The lights pulsed. All 3 synchronized. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause. The pattern repeated 6 times. Then they moved again, drifting back together. When they converged, they merged into a single sphere. The sphere dropped, fast, not falling, but descending in a controlled manner, disappearing behind the mesa. I waited for it to reappear. It didn't. I started the truck and drove north. I knew the area well enough to navigate without GPS. The road was rough but passable. I climbed a series of switchbacks that led to the top of the mesa. By the time I reached the plateau, the sky was empty. I parked and got out, scanning the area with my flashlight. The mesa top was flat, covered in sparse vegetation and scattered rock. I walked a grid pattern, looking for depressions, scorch marks. Anything unusual, I found nothing. I called Lydia. It was nearly 4 a.m. She answered on the second tone. "I saw them," she said before I could speak. 3 lights, north of my position. They split and merged. "Did you see them too?" I told her I had, and that I'd driven to where I thought they'd descended. She said she'd done the same. We compared locations. We were on opposite sides of the same mesa, maybe 3 miles apart. If the sphere had landed, it was somewhere between us. "Should we meet?" she asked. I hesitated. Daylight was still 2 hours away. Searching in the dark felt risky, but waiting felt worse. I told her I'd meet her at the midpoint, a wash that cut through the center of the mesa. She agreed. We both started driving. The wash was a shallow channel carved by seasonal runoff, dry now, lined with smooth stones and scattered driftwood. I arrived first and parked at the edge. Lydia pulled up 5 minutes later. We got out and stood in the headlights of our vehicles, looking at each other. "This is real, right?" she said. "We're not both having the same hallucination." I told her it was real. The cameras, the magnetic readings, the depressions. Too much physical evidence to dismiss. We walked into the wash, flashlights sweeping the ground. About 100 yards in, we found it. A circle, burned into the stone and sand. The diameter was maybe 15 feet. The rock inside the circle was darker, heat-affected, with a glassy sheen in places. The sand was fused, turned into irregular clumps of glass. I knelt and touched it. Still warm. Not hot, but warmer than the ambient temperature. Lydia pulled out a thermal camera from her gear. She scanned the circle. "It's reading 30 degrees above ambient," she said. "Whatever was here, it was here recently." We photographed the circle from every angle. We took samples of the fused sand and the affected rock. We measured the diameter and documented the exact location. This was evidence. Real, physical, undeniable evidence. Something had been here. Something had generated enough heat to alter stone and fuse sand, and it had done so within the last hour. Lydia set up a tripod and mounted her DSLR, taking long exposure shots of the circle with a scale reference. I walked the perimeter, looking for secondary marks. I found 3 small depressions, each about a foot in diameter, arranged in a triangle around the circle. The same pattern I'd seen at my camera locations. I called Lydia over. She measured the depressions and cross-referenced them with her magnetic data. "These match," she said. "These are the same type of marks I found at my survey points." We worked through the rest of the night. By the time the sun rose, we had a complete documentation package. Photos, measurements, samples, magnetic readings, GPS coordinates. We loaded everything into our vehicles and drove back to the access point. Neither of us spoke during the drive. We were both processing, both trying to fit what we'd found into some kind of framework that made sense. At the access point, we sat on the tailgate of my truck and reviewed the data. The pattern was clear. 3 points forming a triangle. Magnetic anomalies. Heat-affected stone. Missing time. Lights that split and merged. It was consistent, repeatable, and completely outside the realm of normal experience. Lydia asked the question we'd both been avoiding. "What do we do with this?" I didn't have a good answer. We could report it to our employers. The BLM would probably dismiss it or assign it to a different team for follow-up. Lydia's company would do the same. We could go to the media, but that felt wrong. Sensational. Not scientific. We could publish it in a journal, but we didn't have enough data for a peer-reviewed paper. We had 1 night of missing time, 3 camera failures, some magnetic readings, and a burn mark. Strong evidence, but circumstantial. "We need more," Lydia said. "We need to see if it happens again. We need to establish a pattern, not just observe one." I agreed. We decided to stay in the field for another week. We'd set up a proper observation protocol. More cameras, more magnetic sensors, synchronized watches, redundant recording systems. If the lights appeared again, we'd be ready. We spent the next 2 days preparing. I repositioned my trail cameras to cover a wider area and added 3 more to the grid. Lydia expanded her magnetic survey and set up continuous monitoring at the anomaly points. We synchronized our watches to GPS time and agreed to log everything, no matter how mundane. Every weather change, every animal sighting, every equipment glitch. On the 3rd night, it happened again. This time, we were ready. The sky was overcast, no stars visible, just a heavy gray blanket that seemed to press down on the mesa. Lydia and I were positioned at separate observation points 3 miles apart, linked by SAT-COM. I was on the same rise I'd used before, truck parked, engine off, heater running low to conserve battery. Lydia was at her primary survey point with a full array of instruments. We'd agreed to check in every 30 minutes. At 9:45 p.m., Lydia's voice came through the comm. "I'm seeing something on the magnetometer. Readings are spiking at all 3 anomaly points. Strong fluctuations." I asked her to describe the pattern. She said it was rhythmic. 3 peaks, a pause, 3 peaks, a pause. the same pattern we'd seen in the lights. I told her to keep recording and I'd watch the sky. At 9:52 p.m., the clouds began to glow, not from lightning, but from something above them. A diffuse white light that spread across a large area, maybe a quarter-mile wide. The glow intensified, pulsing in the same 3-beat pattern. I could see the clouds themselves moving, swirling in a slow rotation around a central point. The center darkened, like a hole was forming in the cloud layer, and then the sphere dropped through. It came down slowly, descending through the opening in the clouds, pushing them aside as it moved. The sphere was massive, much larger than the previous nights. I estimated it at over 100 feet in diameter. It stopped about 200 feet above the mesa and hung there, rotating slowly. The surface was different this time. Instead of the textured, oil-like appearance, it looked crystalline, faceted. Light refracted through it, casting geometric patterns on the ground below. I radioed Lydia. "It's here, directly above my position. Are you seeing this?" Her voice came back strained. "I see the glow. I'm heading your way." I told her to be careful. She said she would. I kept my eyes on the sphere. The rotation was increasing, faster and faster, until the facets blurred together. The hum returned, deeper than before, resonating not just in my chest, but in the ground itself. I could feel the truck vibrating beneath me. The sphere split. But this time, instead of dividing into 3 or scattering into dozens of points, it fragmented into 6 large pieces. Each piece was a geometric solid: cube, pyramid, cylinder, sphere, cone, and something I didn't have a name for, all angles and planes that shifted as I watched. They hung in a circle around where the original sphere had been, each one rotating on its own axis. The hum separated into distinct tones, each shape producing its own frequency. Together, they formed a chord that made my ears ache. I tried to start the truck. Dead. I tried the SATCOM. Dead. My watch had stopped, frozen at 9:53 p.m. I grabbed my camera and checked the battery. Full charge, but the screen wouldn't turn on. Everything electronic was offline. I was alone with these impossible shapes hanging in the air above me. The shapes began to move. They rotated around the central point, maintaining their circular formation, like planets orbiting a star. As they moved, they left trails, not light trails, but trails in space itself. The air looked warped, bent, where the shapes had been. I could see through the distortions to the mesa behind them, but the image was stretched and twisted. It was like watching reality tear and heal itself in real time. Lydia's Jeep came over the rise, headlights cutting through the darkness. She stopped about 50 yards from my truck and got out. I waved at her to stay back, but she didn't listen. She walked toward me, her eyes fixed on the shapes above. "What are those?" she shouted over the hum. I told her I didn't know. She raised a handheld device, some kind of sensor. "I'm getting readings that don't make sense," she said. "Electromagnetic fields cycling through wavelengths faster than the instrument can track, and the magnetic field is inverted. North is reading as south." The shapes stopped rotating. They held their positions for a moment, then began to collapse inward. Not toward each other, but toward a point in the center of their formation. The point didn't exist before. It was just empty air. But as the shapes converged, the air darkened. A sphere of absolute blackness formed at the center, growing larger as the shapes fed into it. When the last shape disappeared, the black sphere was the size of a car. It hung there, not reflecting light, not emitting it. Just a void. I felt a pull, not physical, but something deeper. Like gravity, but not on my body, on my attention, my focus, my sense of self. I couldn't look away. The black sphere was the only thing that existed. Lydia grabbed my arm. "Don't look at it," she said. "Look at me. Look at the ground. Don't look at it." I forced my eyes down. The effort felt like lifting a weight. As soon as I broke contact, the pull lessened. I could breathe again. The black sphere began to shrink. It compressed, smaller and smaller, until it was the size of a baseball, then a marble, then a pinpoint. And then it was gone. The hum cut out. The air snapped back to normal. The clouds closed over the space where the sphere had been, and our equipment came back online. My watch started ticking. The SATCOM crackled with static. Lydia's sensor beeped as it rebooted. We stood there, breathing hard, not speaking. Lydia checked her watch. It read 11:34 p.m. Over an hour and a half had passed. I checked mine. Same reading. We'd lost time again. More this time. 91 minutes. I looked at Lydia. Her face was pale, her hands shaking. "I remember it this time," she said. "I remember watching the shapes. I remember the black sphere, but I don't remember anything after that until just now." I didn't remember anything after either. The gap was there again, a blank space in my memory that should have been filled. But this time we had more data. Lydia's sensor had been recording. My cameras had been running. We might have evidence of what happened during those missing minutes. We drove back to the access point and pulled the data. Lydia's sensor showed a continuous recording up until 9:54 p.m. Then a gap. The file resumed at 11:35 p.m. with normal readings. My trail cameras showed the same pattern. Recording, gap, recording. But one camera, positioned on a timer instead of a motion sensor, had continued running. The footage was corrupted, pixelated, shot through with digital artifacts. But there were frames, partial images of the area where we'd been standing. We scrubbed through the footage frame by frame. Most of it was unreadable. But at timestamp 10:47 p.m., a single clear frame appeared. It showed my truck and Lydia's Jeep, both surrounded by a faint luminescence. And above them, barely visible, 3 dark shapes descending. Not the geometric solids. Something else. Smaller, more organic in form. The next frame was corrupted again. We couldn't see what happened next. Lydia enhanced the image as much as she could. The shapes were indistinct, but they had structure, symmetry. They looked almost like they were moving in formation. She saved the image and we both stared at it. "What were those?" she asked. I told her I didn't know, but they'd been there. During our missing time, something had descended. Something had been with us, and we had no memory of it. The next morning, we drove to the burn circle we'd found in the wash. It was still there, but it had changed. The glassy sand had crystallized further, forming geometric structures. Small pyramids and cubes no larger than an inch, growing out of the fused material. Lydia collected samples carefully. "This is silicon dioxide," she said, examining a piece under a hand lens. "Common sand composition. But the crystal structure is wrong. It's organized in a way that doesn't occur naturally. This was shaped." We spent hours documenting the new formations. We photographed them, measured them, cataloged their positions. The pattern was there again. The crystals formed triangles within triangles, nested geometric arrays that spiraled outward from the center of the burn circle. Lydia mapped it on graph paper. The precision was perfect. Each crystal placed exactly where it needed to be to maintain the pattern. "This is a message," she said, "or a marker. Something left this here intentionally." I asked her what she thought it meant. She shook her head. "I have no idea, but it's too organized to be random. This is information. We just don't know how to read it." We returned to our camps and tried to process everything. I reviewed my field notes and realized the elk behavior I'd been tracking correlated with the light sightings. The animals avoided the areas where the depressions appeared. Their movement patterns showed clear avoidance zones, all centered on the magnetic anomalies. Whatever was happening here, the wildlife knew about it. They'd been reacting to it long before we arrived. Lydia's mineral survey data showed similar patterns. Her magnetometer readings indicated subsurface structures that didn't match geological formations. Linear features, too straight and too regular. She pulled historical satellite imagery and found that the area had been visited before. In images dating back 15 years, there were faint markings on the ground, circles and lines that faded between imaging cycles but reappeared in roughly the same locations. This had been going on for years, maybe decades. We met again that evening and shared our findings. The evidence was mounting. This wasn't a one-time event. It was recurring, cyclical, and had been happening in this specific area for a long time. We were just the first people to document it systematically. Lydia asked if we should bring in others. More scientists, more equipment, more eyes on the phenomenon. I told her I didn't know. Part of me wanted help, wanted validation. But another part worried that bringing in more people would change the dynamic, would scare away whatever this was. We decided to stay one more night, one more observation period. If the lights appeared again, we'd have 3 documented events, a pattern, something we could present as preliminary findings. We set up our equipment at dusk, checked our communications, and settled in to wait. The night was clear. No clouds, no wind, just cold desert air and a sky full of stars. Hours passed. Nothing. Lydia checked in at the scheduled intervals. All quiet. I was starting to think it wouldn't happen when at 2:17 a.m. the air changed. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in the span of a minute. My breath came out in thick clouds, and the stars directly overhead began to dim. I looked up and saw nothing at first. Then I realized the nothing was something. A dark patch was spreading across the sky, blocking out stars as it grew. It wasn't a cloud. It was solid, opaque, and it was descending. I radioed Lydia. "Something's coming, not a light this time, something dark. Are you seeing this?" Her response came back fragmented. "Can't see. Interference heading to you." The dark mass stopped about 300 feet up. It was huge, easily the size of a football field, blocking out a massive section of sky. The edges were sharp, geometric, not organic. And then lights appeared on its underside. Not white like before. Red. Dozens of red points arranged in a grid pattern. They pulsed in sequence, creating waves of light that rolled across the surface. My truck's engine started on its own. The headlights came on without me touching anything. I heard Lydia's Jeep do the same in the distance. Our vehicles were responding to the object. I got out and backed away. The dark mass began to rotate, the red lights tracing spirals as it turned. And then it split. Right down the center, opening like a doorway. Light poured out. Not red, but blue-white and impossibly bright. I couldn't look directly at it. I shielded my eyes and turned away. When I looked back, something was descending from the opening. 3 objects, cylindrical, smooth, dropping in formation. They landed in the wash a quarter mile from my position. The impact was silent. No sound, no dust. They just settled onto the ground as if they weighed nothing. The doorway in the dark mass closed. The red lights went out, and the entire structure shot upward, accelerating so fast it was gone in a blink. The stars returned. The temperature rose back to normal, and everything went quiet. I stood there frozen, staring at the spot where the 3 cylinders had landed. Lydia's Jeep came roaring over the hill, headlights bouncing. She skidded to a stop beside me and jumped out. "Did you see that?" she asked. I nodded. She grabbed her equipment. We have to go look right now before anything changes. We drove to the wash and parked at a safe distance. The 3 cylinders were still there, standing upright in a perfect line. Each was about 12 feet tall and maybe 4 feet in diameter. The surface was smooth, metallic, reflecting our headlights like polished chrome. We approached carefully, flashlights in hand. Up close, the cylinders looked seamless. No welds, no panels, no visible openings, just perfect unbroken surfaces. Lydia reached out to touch one. I grabbed her arm. Don't, I said. We don't know what these are. She pulled back. We circled the cylinders, photographing from every angle. They were warm to the thermal camera. Not hot, but radiating heat, and they were humming. Barely audible, but present. The same 3-beat pattern. As we watched, the cylinders began to glow. Faint at first, then brighter. The surface became translucent, revealing something inside. Structures. Complex arrangements of components that looked mechanical but moved like they were alive. Flowing, shifting, rearranging themselves in patterns too fast to follow. Then they sank. All 3 descending straight down into the ground. Not digging, not breaking through the soil. Just passing through it like it wasn't there. Within seconds, they were gone. The ground where they'd been showed no disturbance. No holes, no depressions, just undisturbed sand and rock. Lydia scanned the area with her magnetometer. There's something down there, she said. Deep, maybe 50 feet. Strong magnetic signature. Whatever those things were, they're still here, just underground. We marked the location and backed away. Neither of us spoke during the drive back to the access point. We were beyond words, beyond rational explanation. We'd just witnessed objects descend from a massive aerial structure and sink into the earth. And we had documentation. Photos, sensor readings, witness testimony. This was real, undeniably, impossibly real. We didn't leave the area that night. We couldn't. We set up camp together at the access point, both of us too wired to sleep, too shaken to drive. We spent the pre-dawn hours reviewing our data, cross-checking our observations, making sure we hadn't missed anything. The evidence was overwhelming. 3 nights of sightings, multiple forms of physical evidence, magnetic anomalies, burn marks, crystalline formations, video footage, and now 3 cylindrical objects buried beneath the desert floor. Lydia wanted to excavate. She had the equipment to dig down 50 feet if necessary. But I talked her out of it. We didn't know what we were dealing with. If those objects were still active, if they were meant to be underground, disturbing them could be dangerous. We needed to think this through, consult with others, maybe bring in authorities. She reluctantly agreed. As the sun rose, we made a decision. We'd pack our data, leave the field, and contact people we trusted. Lydia knew a physicist at Los Alamos who specialized in anomalous phenomena. I knew a colleague at the USGS who'd investigated unusual geological formations. We'd present our findings carefully, factually, without speculation. Let the data speak for itself. We broke camp and drove out together, convoy style, neither of us wanting to be alone. The road seemed longer than it had on the way in. Every shadow made me flinch. Every distant rock formation looked like it might be something else. The desert had changed for me. It wasn't just landscape anymore. It was a place where physics bent, where time slipped, where objects appeared and disappeared without explanation. We reached pavement at midday and pulled over at a gas station in Dulce. While Lydia filled her tank, I called my USGS contact on the sat phone. He answered on the 3rd ring. I gave him a brief overview. Unusual magnetic readings, potential subsurface structures, need for consultation. I kept it vague. He said he could meet me in Farmington the next day. I thanked him and hung up. Lydia had less success. Her physicist contact was out of the country at a conference. She left a message but didn't expect a callback for days. We sat in the gas station parking lot drinking bad coffee, trying to figure out our next move. Lydia suggested we contact the FAA, report unidentified aerial phenomena. I told her they'd dismiss it without radar confirmation. She said maybe we should try anyway. I didn't argue. We spent that night in a motel in Farmington. Separate rooms, but we kept our doors open and talked across the breezeway until almost midnight. Processing. Trying to make sense of it. Lydia kept saying it was real. She kept repeating it like a mantra. It was real. We saw it. We documented it. I think she was trying to convince herself as much as me. I didn't need convincing. I knew it was real. That was the problem. Reality had just become a lot stranger and more uncertain. The next morning, my USGS colleague arrived. His name was Dr. Raymond Foster, a geologist with 30 years of field experience. I'd worked with him on a project in Utah 3 years prior. He was practical, skeptical, and thorough. I laid out the evidence on a table in my motel room. Photos, magnetic data, soil samples, crystalline formations, video stills. He examined everything in silence. After 20 minutes, he looked up. "Where exactly did you collect these samples?" I showed him on a map. He studied the location, then pulled out his own maps, geological surveys of the region. He cross-referenced coordinates and made notes. Finally, he spoke. "There have been reports from this area before. Nothing published, just informal accounts. Surveyors finding anomalous readings, ranchers reporting strange lights, but nobody's documented it like this." He picked up one of the crystalline samples. "This formation is artificial, no question. Silicon dioxide doesn't organize itself this way naturally. And these magnetic readings," he tapped Lydia's printouts, "these suggest a large ferromagnetic mass underground. Could be a meteorite, but the depth is wrong. Meteorites don't bury themselves 50 feet down in soft sediment." I asked him what he thought we'd found. He shook his head. "I don't know, but I'll tell you what it's not. It's not natural geology. Whatever's down there was placed there, or it arrived there under its own power." He paused. "I'd like to see the site. Can you take me?" I looked at Lydia. She nodded. We agreed to take him out the next day. We'd show him the burn circle, the depression sites, the location where the cylinders had descended. We'd let him run his own tests and form his own conclusions. Maybe a third perspective would help us understand. We drove out at dawn. Dr. Foster brought a portable ground-penetrating radar unit and a full geochemistry kit. We reached the burn circle first. He scanned it with the GPR, moving in a slow grid pattern. The device showed clear returns at depth. "There's something down there," he said. "Multiple objects. Metallic composition. Buried at varying depths between 20 and 60 feet. He marked the locations and took readings. At the site where the cylinders had descended, the GPR went haywire. The screen filled with noise, returns coming from everywhere and nowhere. Foster adjusted the settings and tried again. Same result. "There's massive interference," he said. "Something's blocking the signal, or reflecting it in ways the software can't interpret." He switched to a magnetometer. The needle swung hard and stuck. "Off scale," he said. "Whatever's down there is putting out a field strength I've never seen outside of a laboratory." Lydia asked if it could be dangerous. Foster said he didn't know. "If it's radioactive, we'd need a Geiger counter. If it's electrically active, we could be standing on a buried capacitor. But nothing I'm seeing suggests immediate danger, just extreme strangeness." We spent the day running tests and collecting more samples. Foster documented everything with the same meticulous care we'd used. By late afternoon, he'd filled 3 notebooks with data. We drove back to Farmington and reconvened at the motel. Foster spread his findings on the table and walked us through them. "Here's what I know," he said. "There are objects underground at multiple sites in that area. They're metallic, highly magnetic, and arranged in geometric patterns. The burn marks and crystalline formations are consistent with exposure to extreme heat, possibly from a directed energy source. The temporal anomalies you experienced—" He paused. "I can't explain those. They're outside my expertise, but the physical evidence is undeniable. Something happened there. Something is still there." Lydia asked what we should do. Foster said we needed to report it, officially, to the BLM, to the USGS, to anyone who would listen. "This is significant," he said, "not just scientifically, but potentially in terms of public safety. If there's buried material of unknown origin putting out electromagnetic fields this strong, people need to know." I asked him who would believe us. He smiled grimly. "Probably nobody, not at first. But we have data, we have methodology, we have repeatable observations. If we present it right, someone will take it seriously, and then we'll get the resources to investigate properly." We spent the next week preparing a formal report. Foster helped us structure it, focusing on the physical evidence and avoiding speculation about the lights. We included photos, magnetic data, soil analyses, GPR images, and detailed field notes. We kept our descriptions factual and our conclusions conservative. The report concluded with a recommendation for further investigation by a multidisciplinary team. Foster submitted the report to the USGS and the BLM. Lydia submitted a separate version to her company. I filed a supplemental report with the Wildlife Management Division documenting the elk behavior patterns. We waited. Days passed. Then weeks. We got acknowledgments, polite emails thanking us for our submissions. But no follow-up, no requests for additional information. No sign that anyone was taking it seriously. A month after we left the field, Lydia called me. She'd been contacted by someone from the Department of Energy. They wanted to interview her about her magnetic survey findings. She asked if I'd been contacted too. I hadn't. She said they'd asked detailed questions about the subsurface metallic objects and the electromagnetic readings. They'd taken copies of all her data. Then they'd thanked her and left. No explanation. No indication of what they planned to do with the information. 2 weeks later, Foster called. He'd received a visit from 2 men in suits claiming to be from the Department of Interior. They'd asked to see his original field notes and samples. He'd complied. They'd photographed everything, taken a few samples, and told him the area was being classified for administrative review. Access would be restricted pending environmental assessment. He'd asked when the assessment would be complete. They'd said they'd let him know. I checked the BLM website. Sure enough, the area west of Dulce had been added to a restricted access list. Reason given: sensitive cultural resources under federal review. No timeline provided. No contact information for inquiries. The entire region we'd surveyed had been effectively closed. Lydia and I met one more time, at a diner in Farmington. We compared notes on the government contacts. The pattern was clear. Someone had taken our reports seriously. Seriously enough to restrict access and classify the area. But they weren't sharing their findings with us. We'd been cut out of the investigation we'd started. "What do we do now?" Lydia asked. I didn't have a good answer. We'd done everything right. We'd documented, we'd reported, we'd followed protocol, and we'd been sidelined. "We did what we could," I said. "We got it on record. Whatever happens next is out of our hands." She wasn't satisfied with that. Neither was I. But we were civilians, contract workers with no authority and no leverage. If the government wanted to take over, we couldn't stop them. We finished our coffee in silence. 6 months have passed since then. I'm working a different region now, monitoring wolf populations in Arizona. Lydia took a job with a university, teaching field methods to geology students. Foster is still at the USGS, still investigating anomalies, still documenting the unexplained. We stay in touch. We share updates. But we don't talk about those 3 weeks west of Dulce unless we have to. I still have the photos, the video stills, the samples Foster let me keep before the men in suits arrived. I look at them sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep. The geometric crystals, the burned circle, the single clear frame showing the dark shapes descending. Evidence of something I witnessed but still can't explain. I've thought a lot about what it means. The splitting light, the geometric solids, the cylinders that sank into the earth, the patterns within patterns, the mathematics of it all. It felt intentional, designed, like we were being shown something, piece by piece, in a language we don't speak. Lydia thinks it was a test. She thinks we were observed, studied, maybe even scanned during those missing hours. She thinks the cylinders were left behind as markers or sensors, monitoring equipment that would continue gathering data long after we left. I don't know if she's right, but I know we weren't alone out there. Something was with us. Something that could manipulate light, bend space, stop our vehicles and our time and our memories with precision and purpose. I haven't been back to the area. I won't be. It's restricted now, fenced and patrolled. But I wonder what's happening there. I wonder if the lights still appear, if the cylinders are still underground, still humming their 3-beat pattern, if more evidence is accumulating that we'll never see public review. The experience changed me. I look at the sky differently now. Every light, every movement, every unexplained phenomenon gets my attention in a way it didn't before. I've become more careful, more observant, and more aware that the world contains things we don't understand, things that operate by rules we haven't discovered, things that may have been here long before us and will remain long after we're gone. If you work in remote areas, if you spend time alone under open sky, pay attention, watch for patterns, document what you see. And if you encounter something that splits into 3, that forms geometric shapes in the air, that makes your equipment fail and your memory falter, remember this: you're not crazy. It's real. Others have seen it too. And whatever it is, it's been here for a long time. I kept one sample, a small crystalline structure from the burn circle, no larger than a quarter. I had it analyzed by a private lab under a false name. The results came back inconclusive. The crystal structure was silicon dioxide, as expected. But the internal lattice showed organization at the atomic level that the lab described as artificially induced. They couldn't explain how it was formed. They could only confirm that it didn't occur naturally. I keep it in a small box on my desk. A reminder. Proof that I'm not misremembering, not fabricating. It happened. The light split, the shapes descended, time slipped away, and something was left behind. Lydia sent me a message last month. Short, no explanation, just a set of coordinates and a date. I looked them up. The coordinates point to a location in southern Colorado about 80 miles from where we'd been. The date is next month. I don't know what she's planning. I don't know if she's going back to the field, to a new site, to continue the investigation on her own. Part of me wants to ignore it, to stay away and stay safe. But another part, the part that needs to know, is already planning the drive. Because here's the truth. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Once you've experienced something that breaks the rules, you can't go back to pretending the rules are absolute. The world is stranger than we admit. The sky holds more than stars and satellites. And somewhere west of Dulce, beneath the desert floor, pieces of something impossible are waiting, still humming, still broadcasting their pattern, still asking questions we don't know how to answer. I'll probably go. When the date comes, I'll drive to those coordinates and see what Lydia's found. Because I need to know. Because leaving it alone feels like giving up. And because whatever this is, it's not finished with us. The lights split and merged and split again. The pattern continues. And I'm part of it now. We both are. The missing time still bothers me. Those hours we can't account for. The gaps in our memory where something should be. I've tried hypnosis, regression therapy, everything I could think of to recover those lost minutes. Nothing works. The memories are gone. Or they were never formed. Or they're locked behind some barrier I can't access. I don't know which is worse. But I know this. I was changed during those gaps. Something was done or shown or implanted that I carry with me even though I can't remember it. I dream sometimes of geometric shapes arranging themselves in darkness. I wake with equations in my head, mathematical patterns I don't understand but that feel important. Lydia reports the same thing. We compare notes. The patterns match. Whatever happened to us happened to both of us in the same way. Maybe that's the real evidence. Not the photos, or the samples, or the burn marks, but the change in us, the knowledge we carry without knowing we know it. The sense that we've been marked, tagged, cataloged as witnesses to something that's been visiting this planet for longer than we can imagine. I'm writing this because it needs to be written. Because if something happens to me or to Lydia, this account should exist. We saw lights split into three. We watched geometric solids orbit in the sky. We witnessed cylinders descend and sink into the earth. We lost time. We gained evidence, and we learned that the universe is far stranger and more complex than the textbooks admit. If you're reading this, you probably found it for a reason. Maybe you've seen something too. Maybe you've experienced missing time or equipment failures or lights that behave in impossible ways. If so, you're not alone. Document everything. Trust your observations, and know that whatever this phenomenon is, it's real, it's recurring, and it's been here all along. The splitting light was just the beginning. I understand that now. The 3 points, the geometric solids, the cylinders, they're all part of a larger pattern. A system. An architecture of presence that we've only glimpsed. And it's still there, west of Dulce, beneath the restricted access signs and the government surveillance. Still waiting, still operating, still splitting and merging and leaving its marks on the world. I'll go to Lydia's coordinates, I'll document what I find, and maybe this time I'll remember. Maybe this time the missing minutes will stay with me, and I'll finally understand what we're dealing with. Or maybe I'll lose more time and come back with more questions than answers. Either way, I have to know. Because the alternative, walking away and pretending it never happened, isn't something I can live with. The desert keeps its secrets, but it also leaves evidence. And I'm going to keep collecting it until someone, somewhere, decides to take this seriously. Until the data becomes undeniable. Until the world admits that the lights in the sky over New Mexico aren't weather balloons or drones or Venus. They're something else. Something that splits and merges and leaves crystals growing in burn circles. Something real. That's my account. Make of it what you will.